Chapter 253. Jiang Pengji stopped in her tracks and suddenly tilted her head to look at him. She said, "The path I say is the one." The guard was dumbfounded. He wondered if his Lang Jun had a bad sense of direction and was too shy to let others know about it. "What are you waiting for? Follow me." Jiang Pengji snorted softly and looked askance at him. Her eyes were misty, and she looked strangely proud. Of course, these troops did not understand what it meant to be Tsundra, but Jiang Pengji's awkward reaction did touch some people's cuteness. "Yes." The guard responded in a loud voice and followed Jiang Pengji's footsteps closely. The audience in the live broadcast room suddenly reacted, and a guess spread in their hearts. Could it be that the host had changed his mind? Nongfu Shanquan Yudiangshuan, streamer, although it's a virtue to stand up for injustice, you should still act within your means. Compared to a complete stranger, I still think that the safety of the host is more important. Even if you don't do anything, you are not in the wrong. Bingtang Lemon, +1. Streamer, you don't have to change your behavior because of other people's opinions. You only have so few people with you. If you meet a group of bandits, not only will you not be able to save them, but you will also get yourself killed. That's not worth it. There was a cost involved in saving people. Jiang Pengji and her group had only come out to look for water. They did not bring any lethal weapons. There were not many of them and their weapons were not good. If the number of bandits far exceeded Jiang Pengji's, wouldn't it be like sending a lamb into a tiger's den? Yuyita, Tisk, there are so many people who are being held hostage by morality. If the host didn't save them, it meant that he wasn't kind and benevolent? If she was in danger because she tried to save someone, would you keyboard warriors climb through the screen to save her? Host, you must be careful. The viewers in the live stream were very conflicted, and their stance was not firm. Jiang Pengji clearly remembered that there was an ID who angrily scolded her for being cold-blooded. However, when she did something that seemed to be an omen of saving someone, the ID followed the crowd and angrily scolded those who were suspected of moral kidnapping, completely forgetting the contents of the bullet screen that he had previously posted. She sneered coldly in her heart. No matter how noisy the bullet screen was, she ignored it. "Lo Siji Lianmeng, what are you arguing about? Is this the first time you've seen the host's personality of not getting up early without benefits?" Compared to those fence-sitters, the truly loyal audience members were more rational and maintained their stance. They might not watch the live stream every day, but they could truly understand Jiang Pengji's character. Is she the kind of person who gets carried away by emotions and acts impulsively? Obviously, she wasn't. Although she didn't know why she changed her mind at the last minute, there was one thing she was sure of. Her reason for saving people had nothing to do with the comments of the audience. If Jiang Pengji was the kind of streamer who could be easily persuaded by the audience, she would not be worth the attention of so many die-hard viewers. According to Lao Siji Lieming's thoughts, perhaps the reason why she saved him was just because the benefits of saving people were far greater than just standing idly by. Yes, Jiang Pengji was that realistic. "You guys keep up, I'll go first." Jiang Pengji nimbly shook off the guards behind her with a few leaps. She stepped on a few boulders beside the waterfall and leaped up. The guards were dumbfounded. Could this be the legendary, leaping onto roofs and vaulting over walls? One of them even wanted to imitate Jiang Pengji's movements, but as soon as his right foot stepped on the first boulder, he suddenly slipped and fell forward, causing him to fall hard. There was a tearing sound in his ears, and his clothes were torn. At that moment, the guards found that the boulders beside the waterfall had become wet and slippery because of the splashing water. They couldn't even stand steadily in straw sandals, let alone Jiang Pengji, who was only wearing a pair of wooden clogs. So, how did Lang Jun get up? What are you waiting for? Hurry up and catch up. If anything happens to Lang Jun, you don't want to live anymore. At that moment, a guard's reprimand pulled them back from the shock. All of them used to be bandits, but after days of intense training and Suku's tireless brainwashing, they had already curbed their savagery. Not only were they loyal to Jiang Pengji, but they also behaved with a sense of righteousness that only a regular army could have. Their mental outlook was completely new. Jiang Pengji was good at martial arts, so she could easily climb up. They were a little stupid, but they could also find their own way. Ma, you go first. Maybe you can survive by jumping into the pool. Listen to me. Go. There was a pool under the waterfall, and it wasn't very high. Ma was a good swimmer, so she could survive by jumping into the pool. Ching Ching panted heavily. As he spoke, his wounds, big and small, were affected, and fresh blood kept gushing out. Because of the excessive blood loss, his lips were pale, and his face was stained with blood. Even in such a mess, it was difficult to hide his beauty. After that, he fumbled to pick up the sharp sword lying beside him, and with the tip of the sword on the ground, he struggled to stand up. If we die together. How can I let my husband face evil people alone? The hair of the woman in green next to Ching Cheng was messy, and the pearls and jade on her head had long been lost in the escape. She held her husband's hand tightly and said word by word, "If my husband dies here, how can I live?" Ching Cheng wanted to persuade her again, but he thought that they were in the wilderness. Even if his wife escaped and luckily avoided the murderous bandits, she couldn't survive in the dangerous jungle. He suddenly felt helpless and could only hold her hand tightly. Tenderness suddenly grew in his heart. Okay. Cough, cough, cough. He coughed up blood. With such a wife, what more can I ask for? Ching Cheng took a deep breath, held her fingers tightly, and said reluctantly. Don't be afraid, Ma. At that moment, a series of messy footsteps came from afar. Occasionally, it was mixed with angry curses. Ching Cheng's heart skipped a beat after hearing it. Those powerful bandits had gotten rid of the guards and were chasing after them? Here they are. They escaped pretty fast. More than 40 bandits were all holding shiny knives. Their coarse hemp clothes were stained with blood, but very few of them were really injured. Just kill them. Cut off their heads and take them back. Don't talk so much nonsense. Faintly, some of the bandits' curses were mixed with this kind of dialogue, which made Ching Ching feel cold in his heart. When did the bandits become so powerful that they could kill more than 100 of his guards with only 40 to 50 people? What kind of bandits would kill people but not rob them? Instead, they would cut off the heads of others and take them away. This was obviously not a case of bandits killing people and robbing them, but someone deliberately waiting here to kill him. Ching Cheng's wife was also a heroine with a lot of courage. At this time, she also realized what was going on and looked at her husband with a serious face. Ching Cheng gritted his teeth and asked sternly, enduring the severe pain of his wound. Who sent you? Chapter 254. He was not an important official in the imperial court. He was just a small official in the county. Although he had some background, he hated the internal strife in the imperial court. Instead, he preferred to stay in small places and laze around. He was also careful in his daily life and would not offend anyone, so, who on earth wanted to kill him and paid a hitman to kill him? Ask the king of hell when you go to hell. The leader of the bandits smiled ferociously, and his eyes fell on the lady behind Ching Cheng with evil intentions. Ching Cheng's wife was in her early 30s and had 2 sons and a daughter. She knew how to live a good life, took good care of herself, and had a good mentality. Except for her mature and gentle temperament, she was as beautiful as a 16-year-old girl. No wonder these bandits wanted to kill her. Anyway, all they needed to do was cut off Ching Cheng's head. It didn't matter how they dealt with the others. In order to catch Ching Cheng, the 2 brothers had been waiting in the wild for many months and hadn't even seen a female mosquito. They couldn't stand it anymore. Ching Cheng was a man, so he understood the meaning of these people's eyes. His face was cold, and he was so angry that his wound was hurt. Facing dozens of evil eyes, Ching Cheng's wife made up her mind and grabbed the sword from Ching Cheng's hand. Honey, I'm leaving now. After saying that, she was about to cut her throat. At this time, the bandits were also approaching. The situation had reached an irreversible point. Anger and hatred filled his chest. At this moment, all kinds of chaotic thoughts filled Qing Cheng's mind. The gentle and refined appearance of the past had been completely shattered. If the heavens had eyes and he could escape from death, he would definitely find out who was behind this and tear them to pieces. Clang! Qing Cheng's wife wanted to cut her throat, but her wrist was hit by a stone. The sharp sword suddenly fell from her hand and stuck into the ground. Tut, tut, tut. How can a bandit not know the rules? Huh? Qing Cheng and his wife didn't see it because of the angle, but the bandits clearly saw who was talking. The person jumped up from the waterfall and stopped Qing Cheng's wife from killing herself. At the same time, he spun around and kicked the bandit closest to Qing Cheng and his wife in the jaw. Half of the bandit's teeth fell out, his mouth was full of blood, and his jaw was deformed. Although he was still breathing, with that kind of strength, his brain was probably crippled by the kick. Almost in the blink of an eye, that person grabbed another person's hair bun and held a knife in his other hand. The long knife slashed across his neck, causing blood to spurt out. Qing Cheng and his wife were also so shocked that they didn't come back to their senses. When they calmed down and took a closer look, they found that the young man in the Confucian robe who suddenly appeared was not as tall as their little daughter. Seeing this, their joy was instantly suppressed. Young friend, these villains are highly skilled in martial arts. There's really no need for you to get involved in this. Before Qing Cheng could finish his words, he saw that the man didn't even turn his head. He just crooked his finger at the bandits, and his tone was full of contempt. I'm here to save this woman. You can do whatever you want to the man. Qing Cheng and his wife were dumbfounded. The excited viewers in the live stream were speechless and sent a few colons. Apart from Jiang Pengji, who else could the person who suddenly appeared be? Her proposal was very friendly, but how could the ferocious bandit agree? Based on the fact that Jiang Pengji had crippled one person and killed another, they would not let her go. The system was also confused by Jiang Pengji's capricious behavior. Didn't you say that you wouldn't do the mission if you didn't save people? She didn't play by the rules at all, and the system was a little stunned. Jiang Pengji was surprised. I think his wife is quite beautiful. It's a pity that she died here. I don't care if the man dies or not, but I want to save the woman. If you think I'm doing a mission, I'll kill the man myself after we deal with these bandits. Then I'll fail the mission. The system, it didn't doubt the possibility that Jiang Pengji would do that. In order to resist the system, its host was also trying her best. Kill them all. The bandits looked at each other and saw the murderous intent in each other's eyes. Go. Jiang Pengji's lips curled into a sneer. The long knife in her hand was still dripping with blood. So soon, there were people who couldn't help but rush up to die. The streaming room had been open for more than half a year, and the audience was already familiar with Jiang Pengji's temperament of killing people easily. At that moment, except for those who were timid and didn't dare to watch, many of the audience felt their blood boiling. After all, it was really helping people when they saw injustice. The hero complex in wuxia novels was always not as good as it was in the TV series. The streamer was the real deal. No matter how good her acting skills were, it couldn't be so real and hot-blooded. Go ahead, but I'll lose if you cross this line. In terms of arrogance, Jiang Pengji was definitely at the level of an ancestor. As soon as he finished speaking, a few bandits rushed over with their swords raised high. Jiang Pengji's eyes flashed slightly when she saw the situation. Her lower body was as steady as a rock, and her body was fast and agile. Although she looked thin and weak, she was no weaker than any man when it came to strength. She dodged and dodged 2 knife attacks aimed at her fatal parts, and at the same time, she took the knife attacks from several people head-on. The bandits thought that they could kill Jiang Pengji with 1 knife attack, but the moment the knife touched her, it was their hands that were split open. The strong men were shocked by the huge force, and they suddenly took 2 steps back. Their lower bodies were momentarily unsteady. It was also in such a short time that everything was difficult to recover. What great strength! That was also the last thought they had left in the world. Jiang Pengji didn't retreat, but moved forward. The blade cut through the void, leaving a beautiful white shadow. At the same time, a cold breeze swept past her neck, and the temperature of her body suddenly receded. Her vision was dim and her eyes were spinning. Yu Yida, kill. Bingtang Lemon, kill again. In Yuejia Zhuge Qinma, one more knife. Ji Kongting, still not dead. Jiang Pengji, do you think you're playing a game? Lo Siji Lianmeng, congratulations to the streamer for completing a perfect 5 consecutive kills. After a while, Jiang Pengji had already seen through many problems, but there were still more questions left in her heart. The people in front of her were not bandits at all. Or rather, they were not authentic bandits. Instead, they were fighters carefully trained by others. The couple behind her was the target of their ambush. The man's name was Cheng Cheng. Since he could make friends with Meng Zhan in Sang Prefecture's Meng County, he was at least from an aristocratic family. What made her wonder was what was so special about this man that the system was afraid of and even wanted to kill him. Yes, the system had an ulterior motive. Even though they had been together for more than half a year, Jiang Pengji still didn't trust the system at all. Even though it issued a real-time task to save Cheng Cheng, in Jiang Pengji's eyes, its real purpose was to kill Cheng Cheng. Jiang Pengji's resistance to the system was not a day or two, and her hatred for real-time tasks was also deep in her heart. She boldly guessed that the system was persuading her to complete the task, but in fact, it was to provoke her and make her deliberately go against it. To that end, the system even took out the punishment of level 6 electric shock as reward bait. Chapter 255. In the blink of an eye, Jiang Pengji had cleanly taken away a few heads. His decisive and merciless manner even shocked these orthodox assassins. They were no match for Jiang Pengji, and now they had the intention to retreat. Naturally, they were no match for her. One hesitation and their heads were separated from their bodies. There were more than a dozen corpses lying at Jiang Pengji's feet. Without exception, all of them were killed with one blow. Some died with their throats slit, while others were beheaded with one blow. Their heads flew into the sky and blood splattered all over the ground. Some still had some flesh left. Compared to these people's heavy losses, Jiang Pengji was unscathed. Sticky blood kept dripping from the blade. Go. What are you afraid of? Everyone, go. One of the bandits roared fiercely, but his companions were not encouraged. Instead, they were even more afraid. They were trying to move forward, but they took a small step back without a trace. Their faces were full of hesitation and fear. These people were almost scared out of their wits by Jiang Pengji. They obviously had an overwhelming advantage in terms of numbers, but no one dared to move forward. Who dared to rush to the front? The people who had rushed to the front were now lying on the ground like corpses. The blood that spurted out was still steaming. The more it was like this, the more afraid they were. The broadswords in their hands could not bring them any sense of security. Seeing this, Jiang Pengji sneered coldly. Tisk, cowardly rats. If these people could rush forward together and work together to deal with her, she could still look up to them and treat them a little more seriously. After all, no matter how strong she was, it was impossible for her to ignore the overwhelming number of swords that were swarming toward her. However, they revealed their fear of death after only a dozen of their companions were killed. Then, they developed the thought of retreating in fear. Even if such people were armed with advanced laser weapons, they would still be useless. Jiang Pengji could kill them in minutes. They retreated, but Jiang Pengji would not. She suddenly gathered strength under her feet and moved forward quickly. The distance between the two of them was infinitely shortened. In the eyes of these bandits, Jiang Pengji seemed to suddenly leave her original spot and teleport in front of them. Her speed was frightening. Ghost, the word bandit escaped his mouth. However, before the next word left his mouth, a cold sensation flashed across his throat. The heat of his body poured out from this wound, causing his brain to stop working. Everything in front of him faded, becoming black, white, and gray. It was a one-sided massacre. The one who had the upper hand was not the bandits, who had a large number of people, but Jiang Pengji, who was covered in blood. Qing Cheng and his wife were dumbfounded. They had thought that they were going to die, but they didn't expect to come back from the dead at the most desperate time. Mrs. Qing pursed her lips and supported her injured husband to the side to avoid being dragged into the battle. Qing didn't forget what Jiang Pengji had said before. He held his wife's hand tightly, and countless thoughts flashed through his mind. Darling. Qing Cheng's wife looked up at her husband, asking him silently with her eyes. Don't worry, madam. Just wait a little longer. He gently patted the back of his wife's hand to calm her down. While they were talking, Jiang Pengji killed a few more people. Her clothes had long been stained by blood, and her original color couldn't be seen. She looked like a ferocious ghost who had walked out of hell. The bandits were really scared out of their wits. Their legs were trembling, and they were anxious. However, these people always remembered their mission. Since they couldn't do anything to Jiang Pengji, they could kill Qing first. Otherwise, if the news of their mission failure got back, their families would probably die without a burial place. With this idea in mind, the remaining few people joined hands to hold Jiang Pengji back, and the other two went to kill Qing Cheng and his wife. Darling. Qing Cheng's wife saw two people rushing out of the chaotic crowd. They raised their knives and intended to cut her husband. She hurriedly stood up and blocked them with her body. Everything happened so fast that it was too fast for her to react. Qing saw it, but he was injured all over and could barely stand with his remaining strength. His wife stood in front of him. When he realized what was going on and wanted to push them away, the two knives were already close to him. Qing lost his voice in fear. My wife. However, neither he nor Qing Cheng's wife, who was waiting for the pain with her eyes closed, saw the knives that were supposed to fall didn't come. The knives that were raised high suddenly stopped at the highest point, as if time had stopped. The expressions of the two bandits also froze at the most ferocious and joyful moment. They seemed to have seen the scene of Qing Cheng and his wife splashing blood on the spot, but it was impossible. As I said, you can do whatever you want. If you cross the line, I lose. Jiang Pengji's knife had already left her hand, and the two bandits, who were frozen, were killed by the knife that had disappeared. At that moment, except for the audience in the streaming room, no one knew how Jiang Pengji had done it. Although the two bandits were not side by side, they were not in front of each other either. How could she kill both of them with one knife? Jiang Pengji's back was facing the two bandits, and she was even pinned down by the enemy. How did she do it under such circumstances? The audience was in a life-and-death situation, so they naturally didn't have extra energy to pay attention to it. They couldn't see everything from their current point of view, but the audience in the streaming room could clearly see what had happened at that moment from God's perspective. Lo Si Ji Lianmeng, she ran away so fast. I just saw the streamer's sword make a big turn. Yin Yuejia Zhuge Qinma, what a beautiful double kill. De Zhuangzhu's wife, I screamed just now. My roommates thought something was wrong with me. It was so exciting. Yi Huang Yi, the streamer's move just now was so cool. I really want to send you 666. Not only did the audience in the streaming room send a series of 666, but the platform was also flooded with all kinds of gifts. If it had encountered such a large number of gifts in normal times, the system would have come to Jiang Pengji to annoy her, but now it was strangely silent, as if it didn't exist. Others didn't know, but Jiang Pengji knew why the system had such a reaction. Coca-Cola, wait a minute, the streamer doesn't have a weapon now. What should we do? This bullet screen was particularly glaring. Many of the viewers who had sent 666 quivered as they finally noticed this point. In order to save people, Jiang Pengji used a long knife to sneak attack the two bandits. Although she saved Ching Cheng and his wife from danger, she also put herself in a desperate situation. She was now unarmed, but the bandits around her who were eyeing her were all holding sharp knives. Chapter 256. He wasn't a reckless or stupid person. He knew that if he reminded Jiang Pengji to be careful, it would remind the other bandits and boost their confidence. The threat of the bandits was not on the same level as that of a killer with a knife and an unarmed young man. However, even without Ching Cheng's reminder, the bandits reacted quickly. They were furious at first, then ecstatic. "Let's go. This guy has no weapon," one of the bandits shouted. Everyone's eyes lit up with ecstasy. It was a heaven-sent opportunity. The broadswords in their hands were thirsty for blood. Whether they were weak or not had a weapon in their hands had nothing to do with each other. If Jiang Pengji had a knife, she could at least give them a quick death and they wouldn't feel any pain or torture when they died. But if she didn't have a knife, it would be a torture. The crisp and muffled sounds of bones cracking rose one after another. Even if Ching Cheng and his wife left the battlefield, they could still hear the sounds clearly. Not to mention the audience in the streaming room. The superb streaming equipment gave them the most authentic enjoyment. Every time a bandit's hand, finger, leg, or neck was easily broken by Jiang Pengji, they would involuntarily tremble violently, as if the pain had fallen on their bodies, causing them to be startled. Jiang Pengji didn't have a weapon in her hands, but it didn't mean that she had lost her ability to fight. On the contrary, hand-to-hand combat was her strength. As a genetic warrior, how could she not have gone through training in this area? What made people unhappy was that she had practiced the moves hundreds of times in her mind, but her body couldn't keep up with the speed of her thinking. To put it simply, the quality of her body was too poor to satisfy Jiang Pengji. She was not satisfied, but in the eyes of the audience and the people present, her skills were beyond imagination. She was brave and invincible. "I really don't know which family this, cough cough cough. Lang Jun is so young and brave." Ching Ching carelessly touched his wound as he spoke. Uncountable pain stimulated his nerves, and his chest was on fire as if it was being licked by a tongue of fire. Ching Cheng's wife secretly sighed. They couldn't even protect themselves now. They didn't know whether the young man was a friend or a foe. Ching Ching seemed to see his wife's worry. He looked down and shook his head, signaling her not to worry. Even though Jiang Pengji had spoken rudely before, if she really had evil intentions towards them, she wouldn't have needed to risk being besieged by the enemy and throw out the weapon in her hand to save them. She could have allowed the bandits to kill people. Since he had made a move, it proved that the other party had no intention of taking their lives. At this time, there was another noise under the waterfall. Ching Cheng and his wife looked at each other and saw the seriousness on each other's faces. Following the sound, he saw a few hands clawing at the edge, and after a while, a few more heads popped out. Ching Cheng quickly gripped the sharp sword in his hand, hesitating whether he should go forward and stab them before they came up. However, what if the people who climbed up weren't bandits but the companions of that young friend? On Ching Cheng's side, the guards who had climbed up with great difficulty were almost scared out of their wits. Lang Jun. The guards who had been struggling to climb up suddenly felt as if they had eaten spinach. They quickly climbed up and pulled out the swords at their waists, trying to help Jiang Pengji out of trouble. However, their Lang Jun was too brave and didn't give them a chance to perform. Bang! Jiang Pengji threw the last body on the ground and stood in the middle of the bodies with a cold face. She looked at the guards quietly. The guards who climbed up awkwardly, for some reason, they felt a little guilty. It was okay to let their Lang Jun take the lead, but as guards, they were not even of any use. It was a great shame. Go back and train well. Jiang Pengji stared at the guards for a few seconds, which directly made them feel guilty. None of the guards dared to look at her in the eyes. They felt guilty. How could they not feel guilty? It took a group of people so long to climb up a waterfall that wasn't very high. Jiang Pengji couldn't bear that kind of speed. If she really needed their help, the bodies would have been cold, so they needed to redouble their training. The guards all showed a bitter smile, but no one dared to refute Jiang Pengji's order. The guards all put their hands together. Yes, Lang Jun. Jiang Pengji was a little satisfied, and her tone finally softened a little. Clean up these bodies, dig a pit, and burn them. Many of the guards secretly felt their teeth hurt. Their Lang Jun was really ruthless. How was she ruthless? Nowadays, people paid attention to returning to their roots. It was fashionable to bury the dead. If they lost a limb when they were alive, they would be disabled when they went to hell. Not only would they be ashamed to meet their ancestors, but they would also be incomplete after reincarnation. Therefore, a full body burial was very important. But Jiang Pengji's words determined the fate of these people after they died. They couldn't even go to hell after death. So, here was the problem. Was it more miserable to leave their bodies in the wilderness and have them eaten by wild animals, or to die without a full body and be unable to go to hell? The guards dared not refute Jiang Pengji, so they could only silently listen to her orders. After that, Jiang Pengji finally had the time to pay attention to the Qingqing couple. The man was tall and slender. He had a light and gentle temperament. Not to mention his looks, he gave off the impression that he was easy to get along with. He was very approachable. Jiang Pengji analyzed him from head to toe without batting an eyelid. Her eyes darkened slightly. On the other side, Qingqing had a strange feeling in his heart. He had an inexplicable feeling. Jiang Pengji glanced at the woman next to Qingqing and then said to one of the guards, "Do you have medicine with you? Treat this gentleman's wound. It's not a fatal wound, but if it's not treated, it'll be dangerous if he bleeds too much." Yes. The guard naturally brought enough medicine with him. "Thank you." Qingqing's wife took the medicine and bowed to Jiang Pengji. Jiang Pengji didn't go over to ask for more information. Instead, she sat on the side, looking gloomy. Others thought she was in a daze, but in fact, Jiang Pengji was just looking at the reward given by the system. System, congratulations to the streamer for completing the real-time task, saving Qingqing. You have received the reward, full breasts, white wrist high, body smooth, sexy shroud. Please receive the reward at the receiving desk. System, are you not happy? She asked the system in her heart. The system sent her a series of ellipses. This time, I have completed the task you gave me perfectly. Jiang Pengji smiled, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. The system replied, the host finally understands my painstaking efforts. I am very happy. However, after the reply, the system became silent again. It wasn't as noisy as it usually was. Obviously, it wasn't as happy as she expected. Jiang Pengji could even imagine it gritting its teeth in anger. Chapter 257. Why was she angry? Maybe it was because Jiang Pengji didn't act according to the system's plan. It would be weird if she felt good. She couldn't help but laugh to herself. Her vigilance and defense against the system, which was not low in the first place, increased by another level. My instructor once told me that when you meet your enemy, the moment they want to kill you is the moment their weakness is the most obvious. Killing intent is also a kind of subjective emotion, and it often involuntarily reveals the most important motive. Jiang Pengji suddenly opened her mouth. The system couldn't stand it anymore. It sounded a little angry. Host, what did you mean by that? What I mean is to tell you, if you want to scheme against me in the future, you better keep your foxtail. She said bluntly. The system was speechless. It was like it was constipated. It couldn't say a word. In fact, before Jiang Pengji opened her mouth, it didn't know how it had exposed its real purpose. There was nothing wrong with the triggered mission, but it still persuaded Jiang Pengji to carry out the mission. The reward, full breasts, was also something she couldn't complain about. As for the punishment, the system paid a lot of money. As long as she refused the mission, Jiang Pengji would be the winner in life. But she didn't play by the rules. The system didn't know where it was wrong until just now. It was calculating in its mind, but it forgot how smart its host was. It was only the description of the real-time triggered mission that made the host suspicious. Ching Cheng, a friend of Meng Zhan from Meng County in Song Prefecture. He is in an unknown danger. Please save him in half an hour. The mission description didn't seem to be wrong, but it was a trap. Who was Ching Cheng? It described him as a friend of Meng Zhan from Meng County in Song Prefecture. The title didn't seem to be wrong, but Jiang Pengji was suspicious because of it. Those who could be friends with Meng Zhan were at least from a noble family. They might even be an official. Therefore, under normal circumstances, the description should be some family or some official. But the description given by the system was, a friend of Meng Zhan from Meng County in Song Prefecture. Who was Ching Cheng to Meng Zhan? Why did the system put him in front of himself? He thought about the grudge between Jiang Pengji and Meng Zhan. Under normal circumstances, she would be lucky if she didn't leave after reading the mission description. If she failed the mission, she would be punished with a level 6 electric shock. Her force fusion would increase by at least 12 points. There were only benefits to rejecting the mission, and it was in line with Jiang Pengji's usual style. The second suspicious point was that the quest was only announced after blood robes appeared. According to Jiang Pengji's usual temperament, it was highly likely that she would help when she saw injustice. She was not afraid at all, but the system just had to issue a mission at this time. The mission content seemed to be to save people according to her wishes, but the effect was to dispel her thoughts. In that case, how could Jiang Pengji not be suspicious? The system, who understood everything, wanted to explode on the spot. This game can still be played? Its stomach was cramping and its head was hurting. It needed to calm down. After a long time, it consoled Jiang Pengji stiffly, even though it was useless. As the other half of the host, I can't possibly harm you. As for scheming against you, that's even more impossible. Jiang Pengji smiled and asked, System, when you said that, didn't you feel like you were lying? The system still wanted to explain, but she forcefully interrupted it and made it swallow its words. Forget it. I never wanted you to be loyal to me. No matter what your purpose is, it has nothing to do with me. However, I hope you can understand one thing. Jiang Pengji, am not someone that anyone can order around. I am not a tool that anyone can use to kill others. Even if it's you, the system. She clicked her tongue and did not hide her arrogance. She and the system had already shed all pretense of cordiality. It did not matter. The system sent a long string of ellipses. After spending half a year together, it more or less understood Jiang Pengji. Unnecessary explanations would only make her more disgusted and vigilant. So what if Jiang Pengji hated it? The relationship between the host and the system was simply that of a parasite and a parasite. Unless it left voluntarily, the other party could not do anything to it. Anyway, she had completed the mission. It had achieved half of its purpose. The system secretly held its breath and could only comfort itself. After this lesson, it would be fine to be more careful in the future. No matter how smart Jiang Pengji was, it was impossible for her to be flawless. One could only be a thief for 1,000 days. How could one guard against a thief for 1,000 days? Jiang Pengji said that being mentally retarded was a disease that could not be cured, just like the system. Her plan failed this time, but it still wanted to succeed next time. After the confrontation was over and the system dared not show itself, Jiang Pengji finally had the leisure to find out more about Ching Cheng's background. He was the first person who was seen as a thorn in the system's side and wanted to use her to watch Ching Cheng die. Coincidentally, Ching Cheng had already treated his wound with the help of his wife. He tied a clean gauze and barely stopped the bleeding. With the help of Ching Cheng's wife, he walked to Jiang Pengji with weak steps and bowed deeply. I am Ching Cheng, from the Ching family of Langyi. Thank you for your help that my wife and I were able to successfully escape from this disaster. Ching Cheng's face was still pale, but he slightly cleaned up his disheveled appearance. It was hard to hide his elegance. Jiang Pengji hurriedly returned the greeting. Hearing his background, she could not help but ask, the Qing family of Langyi? Those with the surname Qing and Langyi had inextricably linked blood relations with the gentry of the Qing family. Looking at the material of Qing Cheng's clothes and his wife's attire, both of their families were quite well off. Yes, Qing Qing said. Jiang Pengji asked, Sir, you are from a noble family. Why didn't you bring any guards when you went out? Instead, you were targeted by those vicious people and provoked a vendetta? Qing Qing looked doubtful. Not to mention Jiang Pengji, even he did not know how he had provoked such a group of people. If it is not convenient for you, I will not ask more. Qing Qing hurriedly said, It is not like that. It is just that, even I have no clue about this matter. I think I have always been kind to people. Although I do not have many close friends, I have never been angry with others. I really do not know how I provoked others to kill me. This time when I went out with my wife, I knew that the outside world was turbulent, so I brought enough guards with me, but they all died in the hands of those vicious people. If it were not for Jiang Pengji's coincidental arrival, Qing Qing and his wife would have died long ago. He was not afraid of death, but he did not like to die without knowing why. Chapter 258. Qing Qing couldn't figure it out, but Jiang Pengji's words gave him a new suspect. Noticing the change in Qing Cheng's expression, Jiang Pengji asked casually, Do you have someone in mind? Qing Qing couldn't say it out loud even if it was really that person, let alone just having a slight suspicion. Jiang Pengji didn't ask further. She glanced at Qing Cheng's wife. The couple had been living a comfortable life. They had never been as embarrassed as they were that day. She asked a very practical question. I just heard from you that all the guards were killed by the villains. Now we're in the middle of nowhere, and we're still a few days away from the nearest courier station. What's your plan? Qing Qing was injured, and his wife didn't do any housework. They didn't know how to survive in the wild. Qing Qing looked embarrassed when Jiang Pengji asked the question. Before he could say anything, Jiang Pengji continued, If you don't mind and trust me, why don't I send you to the nearest station? You can settle down there and then contact your families. You are still in danger if you don't know the background of the thugs. Qing Qing thanked Jiang Pengji for her kindness with shame. If they didn't get a ride, they would have a hard time surviving even if the thugs didn't kill them. Compared to Qing Cheng's gentleness, his wife was very straightforward. She liked Jiang Pengji more after witnessing what she did. You have extraordinary skills and an imposing aura. I wonder which family you are from. The Lu family of Hejin. My first name is Shi. My father is Lu Shi. If you don't mind, you can call me Lanting. After hearing this, Qing Cheng and his wife were both surprised, but they focused on different things. Qing Cheng's wife focused on the young man who was talented enough to be a good son-in-law. You are Lu Zhongqing's son. When Lu Shi was young, he was the man that many girls missed. The story of him and his wife, Gu Min, was even more popular. Qing Cheng's wife had never seen him, but she had heard about him. She didn't expect a talented man like Lu Shi to have such a powerful son. Those villains had forced the couple into a dead end, but in front of this young man, they were so vulnerable. After a while, Mrs. Cheng's mind was already twisted. She labeled Jiang Pengji as the future son-in-law. If any family's daughter could marry Lu Shi's son, it would be a great deal. It was a pity that his daughter was still young. Otherwise, he would really want to settle down for her. Qing Cheng's focus had nothing to do with Lu Shi. It was purely because of Lu Shi. You're already 20. He didn't look like he was 12 or 13 at most. Jiang Pengji was stunned for a moment. She immediately understood the reason behind Qing Cheng's question. She explained, the courtesy name of Lanting was left behind by my late mother. It's just that father and mother loved each other deeply. After mother passed away, she always called me Lanting. Since he had already given it, he might as well just use it. It would save him the trouble of giving it a nickname. Qing Cheng, Such a wild and unrestrained style was really something that Lu Shi would do. Most of the blood on her body had dried up. It was impossible to tell what she looked like. Jiang Pengji told the guards to protect Qing Cheng and his wife. She found a secluded place to wash her face. She couldn't wash off the other blood on her body, but she had to wash off the blood on her face. You're really good looking. Do you have an uncommitted marriage? Qing Cheng's wife was more and more satisfied with Jiang Pengji. She saw that Jiang Pengji looked so delicate and pretty. Although she was a little feminine, she was a popular image of a handsome young man. She was tempted and wanted to be a matchmaker for Jiang Pengji. Jiang Pengji nodded and then shook her head. She said, I did have an engagement, but Master Liaochen told my fortune. He said that I shouldn't get married early. Otherwise, it would be harmful. So, I had to cancel the engagement in order not to waste the girl's time. Qing Cheng's wife gave up on the idea of being a matchmaker. She felt it was a pity. She didn't doubt the truth of Jiang Pengji's words. Marriages between gentry families were not child's play. Unless it was unavoidable, they wouldn't cancel the engagement. Jiang Pengji's reason was irrefutable. Qing Cheng looked at Jiang Pengji's face thoughtfully until his wife pinched him. Her husband was a good teacher. She didn't want to spoil Jiang Pengji's mood by talking nonsense. Qing Cheng smiled bitterly. You've misunderstood me. I just think that you look familiar. I think I've seen you somewhere before. Since Lanting is Lu Zhongqing's son, he naturally looks like him. Why are you thinking about this? Qing Cheng was speechless. He had never really met Lu Shi. They had been friends for a long time. They both knew of Lu Shi, but they had never met. The circle of gentry families was not big, but it was not small either. He had never met Lu Shi, but he had made friends with the same people. He had heard about Lu Shi from his friends. Therefore, Qing Cheng said that Lu Shi looked familiar was not because of Lu Shi. He thought about it and suddenly remembered that he had seen an unfinished painting from his friend a few months ago. If the woman in the painting was a few years younger, more youthful, and softer, wouldn't that be Lu Shi? However, Lu Shi was Lu Shi's second legitimate son. He was the daughter of a concubine in the Lu family and had been raised in a boudoir. Could it be that the woman sleeping among the flowers in his friend's painting was the late Gu Min? It was terrifying to think about it. However, it was not impossible to think about it this way. His friend was Yuan Jing's disciple, and Yuan Jing had some contact with Gu Min when he was young. Perhaps he knew about Gu Min's appearance through Yuan Jing. Are you in trouble, master? Jiang Pengji opened the way with her knife and walked in front. The shrubs were cleared more thoroughly than before. It was more convenient for Qing Cheng and his wife to walk. I see that you look troubled. Qing Cheng was speechless. He felt that it was better not to tell the young man in front of him that there was a boy who was not much older than him who painted his mother. It's nothing. I'm just thinking about who wants me dead. Qing Cheng found a reasonable excuse. Although I have some guesses, I don't think that person would do such a thing, so that was what he was worried about. Jiang Pengji was not suspicious. Even though she could see that Qing Cheng was a little guilty, it was not appropriate for her to ask. Lang Jun, you're finally back. The guards found traces of a fight nearby. Su Ku saw a few people walking out of the forest from afar. From afar, Su Ku saw a few figures walking out of the forest. He hurriedly trotted forward and swallowed all the words he wanted to say. Who could tell him that Lang Jun had only gone out to fetch water? Although it took a long time. How could he be covered in blood when he came back? Chapter 259. Su Ku was confused, but Jiang Pengji was much calmer. What kind of fight? She threw a few water bags to Su Ku and said, ask the guards to gather some firewood and boil it in a pot. Put it back in the water bags when it's cold. The water in the stream is not clean after all. Boil it before drinking. He hurriedly took the water bags and found 2 new faces in Jiang Pengji's team. Su Ku said, the the guards who were looking for firewood reported that they found several carriages and horses without people on the road ahead. There were many corpses lying around. After checking, they found that there was a fierce fight not long ago. The master is worried that it was done by the mountain bandits. Suku had been to that place. After careful inspection, he found that the possibility of the bandits committing the crime was very low. It was more like a premeditated murder. Therefore, he could not help but worry about his Lang Jun, who had gone out to fetch water. He was about to lead some people to search for her, but Jiang Pengji came back with blood all over her body. If it were not for the fact that it was broad daylight, Suku would have thought that it was the ghost of his Lang Jun's death. His heart almost stopped beating. He was scared to death. Jiang Pengji immediately understood and said, "Those should be Mr. Chang's carriages. They were attacked by bandits on the road. I happened to pass by and help them beat the bandits back. Xiaoyu, ask someone to prepare some food." She said it lightly as if she did not remember that they were surrounded by 40 or 50 bandits. Of course, Suku was misled into thinking that those were just ordinary mountain bandits. He did not think too much about it. His Langjuan's face was ruddy, her eyes were still clear, and she was full of energy. He could tell that she was fine at first glance. Well, it was probably those bandits who got into trouble. With that conclusion, Suku did not panic at all. "Yes, I'll do it now." Suku was completely familiar with the housekeeper mode. He did whatever Jiang Pengji said. "Oh, and ask Takshu to bring me some clean clothes. I need to find a place to wash up. It's uncomfortable to have blood on my body." The viewers in the streaming room were instantly excited. Outdoor bathing play. According to the routine, there must be a fool who accidentally passed by, saw her, and then accidentally met the streamer. Just thinking about it made him feel sweet. Sweet? If Jiang Pengji didn't even have this little bit of vigilance, she would have died a few times. Takshu heard the news and ran over. She was relieved to see that Jiang Pengji was fine, apart from looking a little disheveled. "Please wait for a moment, Lang Jun. I will go prepare the clothes." After she finished speaking, Takshu retreated. She went to the carriage's trunk to find a set of clean clothes, a towel, and soap. "County Chief Lu is here?" Ching saw that Jiang Pengji was done with her work and asked. "Yes, I heard that my father is this year's General Evaluation Officer and needs to go to Shangjing to take charge." "Ching, is there anything wrong?" He felt that Ching's expression was slightly speechless. Ching continued to be silent, with a complicated expression. After a long time, he said with a wry smile, "People used to say that Lu Zhongqing was wild and unruly. I used to think that it was someone else who wanted to discredit County Chief Lu. But now it seems that he was right, the evaluation was imminent, but the chief examiner was only on his way now." Lu Shi, as soon as he arrived, he heard someone bad-mouthing his daughter and damaging his image as a father. Who did he offend? He was an old fox in the officialdom, so he did not take Ching's words to heart. "Lanting, these two are." Lu Shi walked over and saw the face of the person who had bad-mouthed him. Just one glance and the unhappiness in his heart disappeared. Although Ching and his wife looked disheveled, they still looked elegant. No matter who saw them, they would sincerely praise them. "Father." She told her father what had happened in detail and said, "It was fate that brought us together, so I invited Mr. and Mrs. Cheng to come and we planned to go to the next station together. After all, the murderer's purpose and background are still unknown. If we leave them in the wilderness, I am afraid that their lives will be in danger. Father, what do you think?" As Jiang Pengji spoke, she found that Lu Shi's eyes were a little blank. She could not help but frown. It seemed that the couple behind her had some background. Otherwise, why would Lu Shi have such an expression? In fact, Ching and his wife did have some background, but not yet. Lu Shi was a man who had been through a lot. He had met Feng Jin, Su Ku, and Qiguan Rang. Ching was no exception. "Oh, it's Ching Wenfu. Nice to meet you." Lu Shi knew Qing Cheng and called him by his name. Qing Cheng's face became serious. They were talking to each other, but their eyes were looking at each other. Before this, they had never met each other, but through a few mutual friends, they more or less had some understanding of each other. Now that they saw each other in person, they naturally couldn't wait to size each other up and see if they were really as outstanding as others said. Qing Cheng was thinking about this, but Lu Shi had other considerations. Because of his daughter and wife, Lu Shi knew some secrets that were not known to others, and one of them was Qing Cheng. Today, Qing Cheng was just an unknown county official, living a leisurely life with his wife. Not to mention the outside world, even in the Qing family, Qing Cheng did not have much of a presence. He was low-key and humble, so he was not well known. Except for a small number of friends who knew his background, outsiders thought that Qing Cheng was just an idle person with no ambition. That was what Lu Shi knew, and the other part was from his wife. Qing Cheng was the first historian who presided over the compilation of the history of the 16 kingdoms, the Xia dynasty, and the Jiang dynasty for the first 60 years. He spent 35 years restoring countless cultural relics and ancient books. He created a new chapter in the history books. He became the imperial censor and was posthumously awarded the title after his death. More importantly, according to Amin's rather resentful description, this capable person, with the support of Jiang dynasty's first ancestor, Emperor Chen, Jiang Pengji, took the lead in formulating a relatively complete examination system for selecting students. She determined many compulsory subjects for students. Lu Shi did not know why his wife was so resentful, but he thought about it when he was young and hated studying. He hated this kind of teacher who would press his head down and force him to recite. Despite her resentment, Gu Min had a very high opinion of this historian. Although Jiang dynasty's founding emperor was the first emperor, she had a bad reputation because of her status as a woman and her ruthless methods when fighting for the throne. Only Qing Cheng insisted on upholding the integrity of a historian. Black is black, white is white. His description of Emperor Qin was detailed and objective, and he never hid his praise. He even wrote a book to refute other groundless slander. Chapter 260. According to his wife, Qing Cheng was not good with words, but his writing was sharp and he was good at scolding people. Lu Shi thought about it. The scene of Qing Cheng holding a book in one hand and a pen in the other appeared in his mind. The scene was so beautiful that he didn't dare to think about it. He was afraid that he would laugh in front of Qing Cheng. Lu Shi entertained Qing Cheng and his wife. He asked people to prepare food and hot water for them. Although the conditions were simple, they were considerate. Jiang Pengji took the guards to bury the bodies of the guards. After all, they died protecting Qing Cheng and his wife. When they came back, they brought back a lot of carriages. She couldn't help but be curious when she saw the marks of the wheels in the ground. Qing Cheng's life was no longer in danger. He was overjoyed when he saw that Jiang Pengji sent the carriages back. Regardless of the others, he went straight into the carriage and opened the boxes one after another. He was relieved to see that the treasures were safe. Qing Cheng's wife smiled and joked, "It's time for you to change your temper. Otherwise, Lu County Chief and Lanting will laugh at you. No one will pick up these boxes if you throw them on the road, but you treat them as your lifeblood. People who don't know better will think that they are treasures." Qing Cheng was a little embarrassed. He blushed because of his wife's teasing. After all, it was a little crazy to bring a few carriages of bamboo slips with him. Lu Shi helped Qing Cheng out of the predicament. He knew how difficult it was to study nowadays. The bamboo slips in the carriages were not as important as one tael of gold for ordinary people. They were just a pile of bamboo slips for starting a fire. But for those who had foresight, they were priceless. It was hard to find one of them even with money. Qing Cheng secretly smiled at his wife. There was a hint of pride on his face, which made people who saw him smile. Because Qing Cheng was injured, he could not withstand any additional torment. In addition, the condition of the road was not smooth, so Lu Shi made the decision to prepare a carriage for the couple. The shock absorption system of the Lu's carriage belonged to the pyramid in this era. Ching Cheng and his wife didn't know the reason at first. They didn't know Lu Shi's kindness until they got in the carriage. Privately, Ching Cheng's wife changed the dressing on her husband's wound. She inadvertently talked about the bandits during the day. "Did you think of someone, my husband?" Ching Cheng's face was gloomy, and he said with disappointment, "Alas, if I had to say who I offended today, it could only be that person, that person." Madame Cheng's eyes darted around as if trying to guess who that person was. "Meng Zhan from Tsangzhou." Ching Ching said hesitantly, "But I don't think Meng Zhan lives up to his name, but I don't think he's that vicious. He just heard some scandals. Why would he want to kill me?" If Meng Zhan really wanted to kill him because of the scandal of exchanging a concubine for a legitimate wife, he wouldn't have left Tsangzhou. Why would he wait a few months before settling the score? Some scandals? What scandal is it? Mrs. Cheng was confused. My husband is not a talkative person. Looking at the wounds on her husband's body, how could she not feel distressed? If she knew who was behind this, she would definitely not let them off easily. Didn't Meng Zhan lose his second son a while ago? On the surface, it is said that he is the son of his first wife, but in reality, he might be the son of a concubine. Ching Ching did not hide anything from his wife. If it weren't for what happened today, he wouldn't have told anyone about it. Gossiping about other people's affairs was not what a gentleman would do. Mrs. Cheng was surprised. She didn't expect it to be like this. In today's era, there was a clear distinction between the legitimate wife and the concubine. Messing up the legitimate wife and the concubine could be said to be a minor offense, or even a minor offense could be said to have violated the law. The whole family would be despised and would never be able to lift their heads again. For a noble family like the Mengs, the higher the status, the more attention they would receive. Naturally, the consequences would be more serious if the scandal was exposed. It seemed that it was not impossible for Meng Zhan to hire a killer. However, Mrs. Cheng had the same opinion as Ching Cheng. She thought the possibility of Meng Zhan being the killer was very low. Think about it. Maybe it was someone else. Ching Cheng let out a long sigh. He racked his brains but still couldn't figure it out. He had to put it aside for now. They had planned to separate at the nearest station, but Ching Cheng and Lu Shi had a similar temperament. They chatted happily. Under Lu Shi's enthusiastic invitation, the two families decided to go on the road together. It was a win-win situation, and it also saved Ching Cheng and his wife some embarrassment. If they sent a letter to their family at the station, it would take at least a month for the family to send someone over. "Lanting, are you interested in these books?" Although they were on the road and the conditions were simple, Ching Cheng's injury had been healed after a period of rest. The 6 Arts of a Gentleman was a compulsory course for scholars. Ching Cheng naturally knew how to ride and shoot. After his injury was healed, he didn't want to stay in the carriage anymore, so he decided to ride a horse to get some fresh air. He found Jiang Pengji was staring at his bookcase, so he couldn't help but ask. "Yes, I found that Uncle Cheng has more books than my father's study." In that era, the books were basically in the hands of the noble families. The richer the family was, the more books they had. According to her understanding, Ching Cheng was not a direct descendant of the Ching family, but the tens of thousands of books in the carriage all belonged to him. She couldn't help but gasp in admiration. She didn't know where Ching Cheng had gotten so many books. If possible, Jiang Pengji would like to make a copy. Books were an important way to pass on human wisdom. They were indispensable if civilization wanted to move forward. Of course, if they wanted to break the monopoly of civilization by the noble families, they were more than enough. Ching Ching didn't know what Jiang Pengji was thinking. He couldn't help but feel proud when he heard what she said. He wasn't bragging. Even the noble families with thousands of years of history might not have some of the books in the box. A small portion of these books are from my family's collection, and the rest are the remnant pages of ancient books that I've collected. Occasionally, when I hear that some houses have rare ancient books, I'll shamelessly visit them. At this point, Ching Chang's words became a little more vague. From this, it could be seen that the shamelessly visit he mentioned might be the kind that came uninvited. Over time, I've accumulated so many, Ching Chang's wife often complained about her husband. She said that she was not the legal wife, but a concubine. The books in the box were Ching Chang's legal wife. Although it was a joke, it showed how much Ching Chang liked the books. Chapter 261. Jiang Pengji wasn't a good student who loved to study, but she respected and feared the professionals who worked in the field of education. Since ancient times, human history had experienced ups and downs, but no matter how tragic the war was, they were always able to rebuild civilization from the ruins at the fastest speed possible. The reason for this was that apart from the strong resilience of humans to survive, another reason was the protection of civilization. As long as the seed of civilization was still there, it would eventually bloom on the ruins. Jiang Pengji naturally respected and yearned for Ching Chang's ambition. Civilization was never exclusive to one family or one clan. It was the unique wealth of the human race. Ching Chang didn't think too deeply or too far, but he didn't stick to one pattern. His eyes didn't only see the present, but he also thought about the inheritance of civilization. That alone made him much better than most of the aristocratic families who cherished their treasures. Jiang Pengji thought about it and asked with a smile, "Uncle Cheng, would you be willing to lend me a few books to copy?" The aristocratic families treated books as their lifeblood. Unless they had a good relationship, they wouldn't lend them easily, let alone let others copy them. Ching Cheng was very generous, but he was also a little childish, so he replied with a smile. "Of course you can, but you have to give me something in exchange." Ching Cheng stroked his neatly trimmed beard and said, "Bamboo slips are easy to get wet, bulky, and not easy to preserve. Every time I find some slips eaten by insects, it hurts my heart so much. I heard that paper in Hejian County is hard to buy. If it's written on bamboo paper, it's light and easy to preserve. I heard that the workshop is your mother's dowry." Ching Cheng's wife, who was sitting in the carriage, was so angry that she almost broke her teeth when she heard her husband's nonsense. "Lanting, don't listen to his nonsense. Those treasures of his are not worth much money." Ching Cheng's wife revealed her husband's secret and said in an angry tone, "If you like any of them, just tell me. You don't have to listen to me." Ching Cheng's face turned red and he secretly wanted to beg his wife for mercy. At least she would give him some face in front of the younger generation. Jiang Pengji couldn't help but laugh when she saw their interaction. "The workshop is indeed my mother's dowry. It produces a limited amount of paper every year, and most of them are ordered to other families. If Uncle Cheng likes it, this nephew will ask the housekeeper to save a few knives for you and send them to your mansion." Hearing her words, Ching Cheng's expression couldn't help but turn solemn as he hurriedly explained. "Lanting, this is a misunderstanding. No matter how frivolous I am, I still have to maintain my dignity. How could I take advantage of a junior? Uncle's original intention was that if you took these books back and copied them, you could also make a copy for Uncle. The cost of paper and ink would be calculated according to the market price. There are more and more books, and Uncle is getting older and older. I don't know how long he can take care of them. Not to mention that bamboo slips were heavy, they were also very difficult to preserve. They had very high requirements for the environment in which they were stored. Otherwise, they would go moldy or be eaten by insects. Among these tens of thousands of bamboo slips, almost every one of them had been rebound. The reason was that they were damp and moldy, and the writing was illegible. When copying, it was inevitable to make mistakes or missing words. In order to ensure that the content of the book was good, he had to go back and forth several times, and then let his sons help him proofread it. After confirming that there were no mistakes, he would recompile it. The project was very time-consuming. Ever since the introduction of bamboo paper, he had thought of replacing the bamboo slips with paper. However, the scale of the paper-making workshop was slow to expand. The paper produced every year was almost monopolized by a few gentry families, so he couldn't order any. That was a pain in the ass. Jiang Pengji rolled her eyes and replied with a smile, I can't show you my handwriting. I can look at it myself, but if I show it to uncle, won't I be displaying my slight skill in front of an expert? How about this? I will provide the ink, paper, and inkstone, and uncle will make an extra copy for me. The ink, paper, and inkstone will be provided free of charge. Just treat it as a gift for uncle. Ching Ching was speechless. He almost couldn't wrap his head around what she was saying. Before Jiang Pengji could finish her words, a sachet flew toward her head. She raised her hand and grabbed it to avoid being hit. How dare you? Uncle Cheng is such a person. How can he make such a joke? Lu Shi's face was cold. He was the one who threw the sachet. Ching Ching quickly stopped and teased Lu Shi. Zhongqing, why are you angry? Are you angry that your son made a bad deal? Even though Ching Ching didn't care much about business, he knew how expensive the bamboo paper in Hejin County was. In order to finish copying those tens of thousands of bamboo slips, the amount of bamboo paper needed was not a small amount. Of course, many of the bamboo slips were unique copies, so their value was not low. Lu Shi said, Wenfu, you misunderstood me. Bamboo paper is expensive outside, but it doesn't cost a lot to use it. This kid is stupid today. He wants to exchange some paper for Wenfu's book collection. I've never seen or heard of such a black-hearted businessman. Ching Ching laughed and said to Jiang Pengji, like father, like son. You have the style of your father. Lu Shi was speechless. He believed that Ching Ching was good at scolding people. He had just called Jiang Pengji a black-hearted profiteer, and Ching Ching had turned around and mocked him. Wait. Who is the father and daughter here? Seeing that Ching Ching and his daughter were on the same side, Lu Shi suddenly felt that he was in a bad situation. He was so tired. Ching Ching agreed readily to Jiang Pengji's half-joking words. Okay, nephew. As long as you give me enough bamboo paper, I'll send you a copy when I'm done. It's worth it. Jiang Pengji blushed and felt a little embarrassed. Bamboo paper was extremely expensive to outsiders, but her family knew that it was worthless. Using such a small amount of paper to exchange for tens of thousands of precious books, this business could not be more profitable. Even Jiang Pengji felt that she was somewhat shameless. But Ching Ching accepted it so generously, without the slightest hint of displeasure, which made her feel a lot of emotions. In fact, Ching Ching also felt a little embarrassed. He felt that he had taken advantage of the younger generation. He was not a selfish person. He treasured the books very much, but if someone wanted to borrow them and copy them, he would gladly agree. With just one more copy, they would be able to exchange for countless precious bamboo papers. In the future, they wouldn't have to worry about the preservation of their books. Thus, they would be able to solve their worries. It seemed that both sides had suffered a loss, but in fact, from another perspective, they had both benefited. In other words, the value of some things couldn't be measured by gold or silver. Thank you, uncle. I'll cherish it. Chapter 262. After sitting in the carriage for so long, it was rare for Lu Shi to come out and relax his stiff and sore limbs. Otherwise, his muscles would protest. In another half a day's journey, we will be able to enter the city. I haven't been here for a few years, but Shangjing is still bustling. The outside world was about to turn upside down, but the majestic Shangjing was still singing and dancing, which made Lu Shi, who was used to desolation, very uncomfortable. The imperial family of Dongqing had no other skills, but they were good at seeking pleasure and pretending to be peaceful. With such a weak and incompetent imperial family, it was no wonder that the Shangyang Palace could not be protected and was burned to the ground. Lu Shi's head hurt when he thought of the mastermind who burned down Shangyang Palace and massacred the imperial family. The mastermind was none other than Qi Guanrang, Prince Shouchang's advisor. Yes, he heard it right. It was that Qi Guanrang. A counselor of low birth, a treacherous character, ruthless methods, and a counselor whose loyalty had all been fed to dogs. Gu Min didn't know much about history. Most of what she knew was from TV dramas, so she only remembered 3 things about Qiguanrang. First, he burned down Shangyang Palace and killed the men of Dongqing's imperial family. Second, he caused the Empress to lose 3 cities in a row. Third, he set up a trap in the prison and caused the former master's good situation to collapse instantly. He lost everything and surrendered to the Empress on the day the city opened. When everyone was pleading for mercy for their former master, hoping that the Empress would spare the life of the former master, Prince Changsho, and just imprison him. This would also show off her benevolence. The Empress asked for Qiguanrang's opinion, but he actually insisted on beheading him and eliminating the root of the problem. He even said a very famous sentence: "A good bird chooses a tree to nest in, and a virtuous minister chooses a master to serve. Since he betrayed me, why should I care about him?" Listening to him, it was as if he had been cheated on by Prince Changsho. Others would at most whine when they were cheated on, but Qiguanrang directly killed the old master's family. Although he didn't know why Qiguanrang knew his daughter early, it was still a good thing. Without the help of Qiguanrang, the timid and hesitant Prince Changsho wouldn't be able to do anything. When the sun was high in the sky, they finally saw the towering city wall. Lu Shi was lost in his thoughts. Cheng Cheng, who was riding parallel to him, used his hands to cover his eyes. Suddenly, he let out a sound of surprise and smiled faintly. "Did you see someone familiar?" Lu Shi followed Cheng Cheng's line of sight. In the distance, there was a luxurious carriage with a thin gauze draped over it. A blurry figure was sitting inside. Around the carriage stood hundreds of armored guards with long spears in their hands. In addition, there were a few young men dressed in Confucian robes with their hair crowns hanging high above their heads. Looking at the bows and quiver on the backs of the horses, it was not difficult to guess what these people were going to do next. It was likely that the noble sons of Shangjing were taking them to participate in the hunt, taking the opportunity to exchange feelings. With the assessment around the corner, this kind of activity was always particularly frequent. They seemed to be going on an outing to participate in some kind of gathering. Should Wen Fu go and say hello? Ching Ching thought for a moment, then shook his head. There's no hurry. Let's go into the city first. Considering the situation in Shangjing, Lu Shi asked the motorcade to move to the side to avoid colliding with people and causing unnecessary trouble. However, just because they didn't take the initiative to look for trouble didn't mean that trouble wouldn't come looking for them. Jiang Pengji started her live stream early that day. The audience in the live stream room received the news early in the morning and rushed over quickly. The room was full in an instant. Shangjing was a real ancient capital city. The degree of prosperity and extravagance wasn't something that a small rural place like Hejin County could compare with. Jiang Pengji rode on white leisurely. It looked like she was looking at the scenery, but in fact, she was chatting with the audience. Bing Tang Lemeng, #propping chin. As soon as I saw the road paved with bricks, I knew that the streamer was about to reach Shangjing. Ancient roads were mostly dirt roads or gravel roads. The former was wet when it rained, and the latter was bumpy. It was a huge project to pave a road with bricks of the same size, and it cost a lot of money. It was impossible to find such a good road if it wasn't a capital city like Shangjing or a big city with a developed economy. Tujio Qifan, I just want to get into the city as soon as possible. I want to see Shangyang Palace, which the streamer said was Lingshao Palace in heaven, Shangyang Palace on earth. I wonder how prosperous it is. I don't know if its scale is comparable to the Forbidden City. This is an authentic ancient palace building. Lo Siji Lianmeng, come on, Shangyang Palace is a royal palace. Ordinary people can't even get close to the palace walls, right? At most, they can see the prosperity of Shangjing. It's not possible to see the whole of Shangyang Palace. Host V, when the world is in my hands, you can see wherever you want. As soon as the words came out, the whole streaming room exploded. Streamer Zheng Shangwo, 666, do you feel the happiness of being spoiled by the domineering streamer? Inueja juga chinma, yes. Chunlai, I'm so happy that I'm going to faint, okay? Ju gu chesty, I've already fainted. I'm so happy that I don't want to get up. I need the streamer to kiss me to get up. Dawang sends Walai Ponchen, that's really exciting. Streamer, do you still need fangirls to warm your bed? Nide de Yida, go away, you little demons. The streamer is obviously talking to me. Unruly people. With the audience in the streaming room joking around, the journey wasn't boring. It was even a little interesting. Jiang Pengji didn't have a good impression of streaming, but she liked some cute little angels in the streaming room. Just as the corners of her lips curled up into a faint smile, the feeling of being spied on suddenly entered her brain, which made her smile disappear. Without thinking, Jiang Pengji quickly pulled out the longbow that was placed on the back of the horse. She quickly put an arrow on the bowstring and drew the bow to a full moon. Pa, the noise made Lu Shi, who was in front of her, come to his senses. He turned his head and saw an arrow explode in the air. The remains fell to the ground. His daughter had not finished drawing the bow. Her expression was cold, and her dark eyes were filled with murderous intent. Lu Shi was about to speak. Lan, he saw his daughter draw the bow even faster. Before he finished speaking, an arrow had left the bowstring at the speed of lightning. Trash. Jiang Pengji looked coldly at the guy who was still smiling. His hair was blown away by the arrow. He looked panicked and lost. Although the other party didn't have murderous intent, it was full of malice to embarrass her. Since that was the case, she would give him a taste of his own medicine. Who asked that trash to have such a cheap hand? With a duong sound, the arrow steadily shot into the horizontal bar of the shaft of the carriage. The move alarmed the armored guards, and they all looked as if they were facing a formidable enemy. Lu Shi was surprised at first, but when he saw the arrow explode in the air after being shot by his daughter, he felt a lingering fear in his heart. He was furious. Ching Cheng was a beat slower to react. His face suddenly turned pale. They didn't know the target of the arrow. They only knew that it was aimed at Jiang Pengji, so they subconsciously thought that the arrow was meant to kill her. Chapter 263. Kojiao Chi Fan, damn, which bastard attacked the streamer? Doesn't he know that if he pisses off the streamer, she'll tear him apart with her bare hands? Tang roasted chestnut, I just blinked. What happened? It happened too fast. Jiang Pengji reacted in time to block the attack and retaliate. The viewers in the streaming room were all dumbfounded. At that moment, they wished there was a replay button so that they could go back a few seconds and see what happened in detail. Kojiao Chi Fan, a bastard attacked the streamer with a bow and arrow, but the streamer is indeed a beautiful woman. She shot the arrow in the air and blew it up. She even retaliated with an arrow. She's so handsome that I can't even close my legs. After being reminded, everyone looked at the shattered remains of the arrow on the ground. Through the live stream's perspective, they saw the coward who had his hair blown off. His face was full of panic. He fell to the ground and almost peed in his pants. They all gave Jiang Pengji a thumbs up. Well done. A huge wave of rewards flooded in. Jiang Pengji had foreseen this and temporarily turned off the backstage notification sound. The group of people seemed to have a powerful background. The owner of the carriage had an even more powerful background. The armored guards all stepped forward and surrounded Jiang Pengji's group as if they were facing a formidable enemy. However, the troops were not to be trifled with. They immediately pulled out their broadswords and confronted them. Seeing that someone was about to be killed, Ching Ching saluted the group with a gloomy face. He spoke in a clear voice, which almost made Lu Shi kneel. What does Prince Changsho mean by this? Huh? Prince Changsho? Lu Shi was confused, but on the surface, he looked cold and emotionless. His eyes kept drifting in the direction of the carriage. The person in the carriage couldn't sit still after Ching Ching called out his identity. He asked someone to lift the veil, revealing a face of about 30 years old. What happened? He asked his attendants as if he didn't know anything. Your Highness, two Langjuns used an object in the distance as a target for fun, but they didn't expect a commoner to pass by on a horse and block the object. That commoner is extremely daring. He attacked the Langjuns in public and even alerted Your Highness. The attendant's voice was shrill, which sounded very harsh. Prince Changsho snorted and said coldly, a commoner attacking an aristocrat in broad daylight is a crime punishable by death. With just a few words, he had smoothed out the crisis that Jiang Pengji had faced previously. Instead, he had pinned a groundless crime on her head. At this moment, a young man who was accompanying them heard a familiar voice. He suddenly turned around, his eyes filled with surprise. He cupped his hands towards Prince Changsho and said, Your Highness, the person who spoke just now is my nephew. Please allow me to go and understand the situation before making a decision. Prince Changsho was initially a little displeased. After all, when that arrow hit the shaft of his carriage, he was so frightened that his heart almost stopped. However, when he saw who the young man who spoke was, he silently suppressed his dissatisfaction, and a faint smile appeared on his frightened face. Yumo's nephew must be an outstanding talent. Why don't we call him closer? Without waiting for Prince Changsho to finish, Qing Jing excused himself and rode forward, ordering the armored guards to put down their spears. Everyone, stop. Seeing that Qing Cheng wasn't injured, Qing Jing felt slightly relieved. Wenfu, long time no see. Lu Shi was dumbfounded. The young man in front of him was at most in his 20s. Why did he call Qing Cheng by his courtesy name? After all, Qing Cheng was a few years older than him. It's been a few months since we last met in Langya. It has indeed been a long time. Yumo, come, let me introduce you. This is the county chief of Hu County, Lu Zhongqing. He is one of the extraordinary people in Dongqing that you always talk about. Now that you've met him, aren't you excited? Qing Jing was dumbfounded, and Lu Shi was even more dumbfounded. As for Jiang Pengji, she already didn't know what to say. What happened just now? Why did you have a conflict with Prince Changsho's guards? Qing Cheng's face became gloomy again. Lu Shi's expression was even worse, which made Qing Jing's heart skip a beat. TSK, let me tell you about it. Just now, there was a despicable person who aimed an arrow at my head. I only shot away his crown, which made him look like a clown. I was already being very polite. Why, Lang Jun, do you want to reprimand me indiscriminately? Jiang Pengji urged her horse forward. She didn't have a good impression of Qing Jing, or Qing Yumo, whom Lu Shi had mentioned before. Qing Jing looked embarrassed. Faced with Jiang Pengji's tough tone, he didn't get angry. Instead, he cupped his hands and asked, May I know who this Lang Jun is? Lu Shi put on a fake smile and said, My only son. May I know the name of the despicable person just now? He just wanted to make fun of them because they were tired from the long journey. Their clothes were unremarkable, and the decorations on their carriages were simple. If it were an ordinary merchant's carriage, they would probably have to swallow the humiliation. But since it was Lu Shi, the meaning was different. He deliberately emphasized the word only, and Qing Jing suddenly realized that it was a serious matter. You misunderstood me, Lang Jun. I am not the kind of person who does not distinguish between right and wrong. Qing Jing smiled bitterly and said, I was chatting happily with my friend just now, and I didn't notice what was happening around me. By the time I realized it, Lang Jun had already made that person lose face. Lu Shi's son was almost shot to death on the official road outside of Shangjing. He couldn't imagine what would happen if that really happened. Serves him right for being despicable. Lang Jun, this has nothing to do with you. I won't ask you to speak for me, but I hope you won't plead for that person either. Jiang Pengji clicked her tongue. Although she didn't act arrogantly, her attitude was quite tough. A kind person would be bullied, and a kind horse would be ridden. The rule of the law of the jungle was even more straightforward in today's stratified society. If it wasn't her, but any other ordinary person, they would have fallen off the horse in fright. Maybe they would have been trampled by the horse's panicked hooves. White was a well-trained warhorse from the northern borderline. She had reacted calmly just now, which prevented a tragedy. Qing Jing nodded and said, "Of course." Qing Qing snorted and said disdainfully, "Prince Changsho?" "Humph." Qing Jing went back and told the identity of Lu Shi and his people. Not only did Prince Changsho's expression change, but his attitude was completely biased towards Lu Shi and his people. The young man who accompanied them also looked as pale as a sheet. The two Langjuns who had been joking with each other were trembling and their lips were pale. How could they have known that those ordinary people, who looked like commoners, had such a powerful background? Who asked you to be despicable? Who asked you to be despicable? Who asked you to be despicable? The young man who had shot the arrow looked at his own hand with tears in his eyes. He wanted to go back in time and slap himself. Who in Dongqing was the most dangerous person to offend? Lu Shi was definitely on the list. He was this year's general evaluation officer, and they had almost shot his son. How could they expect him to give them good results? To be more serious, Lu Shi only had to move his pen and give them a bad evaluation. Their careers would be over. Even if they didn't enter the officialdom, it would be impossible for them to be famous scholars with just a title. Obviously, Lu Shi was not such a generous person. Chapter 264. Lanting, you weren't scared, right? On the way into the city, Lu Shi and Qing Cheng looked gloomy. The atmosphere around them was very oppressive, as if they were brewing anger. Qing Cheng's wife, who was sitting in the carriage, knew about it. She quickly asked Jiang Pengji to stop riding and sit in the carriage for a while. She looked at Jiang Pengji carefully and was relieved when she was sure she was fine. These foppish boys are getting more and more presumptuous. They don't know the teachings of the saints. They are getting more and more unscrupulous just because they are protected by their ancestors. Fortunately, Lanting has excellent archery skills and Lu County Chief is watching over us. Otherwise, there would be another bloody case under the Emperor's feet. Qing Cheng's wife was very angry. She squeezed Jiang Pengji's hands and said, "Look at you. Your hands are cold." Jiang Pengji smiled, weakly, as if she was pretending to be strong. Qing Cheng's wife felt even more sorry for her. Jiang Pengji chose to ignore the comments from the audience in the streaming room that her acting skills were enough to win an Oscar. After a while, Jiang Pengji pulled her hands out of Qing Cheng's hands. She looked obedient and said in a low voice, "Auntie, I wasn't scared. I was born this way, born this way. It's normal for you to be full of vigor and yang energy to be in your growing period. Yet, your hands are so cold. It's obvious that you're overflowing with cold energy. Lu Zhongqing is indeed a man. He doesn't know how to raise a child. How can he be so careless?" Qing Cheng's wife raised her eyebrows. She was a little dissatisfied with Lu Shi. A man was indeed a man. He gave birth to a child but didn't take care of him. Poor Lu Shi lost his mother at such a young age. Who else would take care of a child so meticulously except for his biological mother? Jiang Pengji's smile froze a little, so Qing Cheng's wife didn't notice it. "Didn't you ask a doctor to come to the mansion to recuperate?" Qing Cheng's wife asked. Before Jiang Pengji could answer, she continued, "Lanting, you can't ignore your health just because you are young. If a man lacks yang energy and has too much yin energy, it will hinder the reproduction of his children. You are the only legitimate son of Lu County Chief. The heavy responsibility of raising a house is on your shoulders." Jiang Pengji was speechless. "Auntie, I do know a divine doctor of Xinglin, who is very knowledgeable about health. That person is currently in Shangjing. When everything settles down, Auntie will take you to have a look. You're still young, so you don't have to be so shy about this kind of thing. You should be magnanimous." When the gentle person chanted, the power was comparable to the band-tightening spell. Jiang Pengji could not do anything about it. Other than nodding his head in agreement, he would occasionally mumble something. After waiting for a while, the convoy was finally allowed to enter Shangjing. After passing through the Vermilion City Gate, the bustling ancient city was like a beautiful woman with a veil covering her face. After a bout of shyness and anger, she was finally willing to slowly lift a corner of her veil, revealing a beauty that could captivate even the birds and beasts, and outshine the moon and flowers. Lu Shi had sent a letter to Feng Ren a long time ago. He planned to stay and eat at Feng Ren's house for a while. Feng Ren also knew Lu Shi's temper. How could he refuse? As soon as they entered the city, a steward in fine clothes came forward and asked, "Are you from County Chief Lu's mansion?" "I am Lu Shi." "I remember you, Xianda's manservant. Look at how you're dressed. You've been promoted." Lu Shi got off the horse. Even though he was facing a manservant, he did not have the arrogance of an ordinary aristocrat. The steward immediately felt honored, and a warm feeling flowed in his heart. He had been sent to wait for Lu Shi's carriage because he had seen Lu Shi's face before. He didn't expect Lu Shi to recognize him as well. It had to be known that this was a few years ago. At that time, the steward was just a servant who served tea. At that moment, the steward's face was full of smiles, and his attitude toward Lu Shi became more intimate. "Master has asked the mansion to prepare a courtyard for you. Please come with me." If Hejin County was said to be the pretty daughter of a humble family, then the prosperous and mighty Shangjing was said to be the daughter of a noble family who was dressed in luxurious clothes and had a head full of pearls and jade. She was graceful and elegant, and her appearance was so beautiful that it could cause the downfall of a city. At first glance, the houses were scattered in picturesque disorder, the streets were neat, and the people and merchants who came and went were dressed neatly. There was not a beggar in shabby clothes in the streets and alleys. It was as if this was what a prosperous ancient era should look like, but it was just as if. Jiang Pengji swept her gaze across. Her eyes, which were originally filled with some interest, suddenly became unhappy. "Let's go. I'll find out where Master Yuanjing is staying later. After a short rest, I'll bring you to visit him." Although he couldn't bear to part with his daughter, Lu Shi knew that he would only make things worse if he helped her. She could only walk down that path alone. If he took Yuanjing as his teacher, he would be able to make friends with many young elites. It would also be good for him to accumulate some capital in the future. At the very least, he would be able to keep a clean reputation. Jiang Pengji nodded. She had heard of Yuanjing's name for a long time. Now that she was about to meet him in person, she wanted to see what was so special about him. On the other side, Prince Changshou's mood could be imagined after Lu Shi rudely brushed him off. He didn't look happy throughout the whole process. The foppish playboy was even more careful. His expression was as gloomy as a bitter gourd, as if he would pout and burst into tears in the next second. Qing Jing was especially disdainful of his attitude. As a man, he dared to take responsibility for his actions. Since he had the guts to make fun of the commoners, he should have been mentally prepared to kick an iron plate. He was proud of himself when he bullied the commoners, but he panicked after offending Lu Shi. His ugly behavior made people want to vomit. Qing Jing glanced at the gorgeously dressed Langjuns at the gathering. Yes, gorgeously dressed. There was nothing wrong with the phrase. He hadn't been to Shangjing for a few years, and the atmosphere there had changed. Not only did the men put on makeup, but they also drew on their eyebrows, painted their lips, and dyed their cheeks red. They even had to deliberately tighten their waists. They walked like willows swaying in the wind. Every one of them was more delicate than a girl. If it wasn't for the fact that the General Evaluation Officer, Lu Shi, didn't like men who were too delicate, their outfits would have been even more unsightly. Qing Jing really couldn't talk to those people, so he just sat in the corner and slowly drank his tea to calm himself down. As for the two whimpering Langjuns in the distance, he felt like he would go blind if he looked at them for too long. "Yumo, why are you sitting here alone? Aren't you going to play with them?" As he was feeling depressed, a wisp of light fragrance hit him. A young man in a mint green shirt sat directly next to him. The newcomer was tall and slender. His skin was as delicate as flawless white porcelain. He didn't put on any makeup, but he was better than a girl. He had bright eyes, red lips, and white teeth. He was truly a handsome young man. Qingjing didn't bother to look up. He knew who it was just by listening to the voice. What are you playing at? I don't want to look at you. My stomach still hurts. That's why you don't have your meals on time. Han Yu curled his lips and quickly took the fruit in front of Qingjing and stuffed it into his mouth. The slightly sour juice overflowed his mouth. He said with disgust, I gave you such a raw fruit. No wonder you have a stomachache. Qingjing's mouth twitched, and he continued to drink his tea. Chapter 265. The host of the gathering was Prince Changsho. The purpose of the gathering was for students to exchange knowledge, but in fact, it was to attract talented students. The Cheng's and Prince Changsho's relationship was somewhat indirect. Qingjing had to come because of his pride, but Han Yu didn't have that many concerns. My teacher lost a game of chess with Zixiao and was urged to go to Ji Shan's hot spring today. I slept in for a while, but they didn't wake me up. Han Yu was depressed. His friends were going to exploit his teacher's money, but he was left behind because he woke up late. Zixiao's chess skills have improved a lot. I can't believe he won a game against my teacher. Although Master Yuanjing wasn't as good as the rumors said, his relative was proficient in calligraphy and painting. Any one of them could be regarded as a master. It wasn't difficult to be proficient in one of them, but it was difficult to be proficient in all of them. After all, a person's energy was limited. There was no other reason other than talent. Qingjing couldn't help but laugh. He understood Han Yu's depression. Ji Shan's hot spring was famous in Dongqing. Many gatherings were held there, and many students liked to go there. More importantly, it wasn't easy to make their teacher lose a game and pay for a student to go to the hot spring willingly. Han Yu muttered. Zixiao's chess skills are getting better. I felt like I was being led by the nose when I played a game with him yesterday. I was left alone by them. It was boring, so I came to find you. I saw that you had nothing to do at the gathering. It was boring. Qingjing shook his head and said, it would be better for you to go to the brothel to have fun than here. Prince Changsho seemed to be kind, but he was secretly ambitious. He had his eyes on many talents from aristocratic families. Han Yu really shouldn't have come here. Unexpectedly, Han Yu said with a bitter face. Go to the brothel? Let those girls look at me and have fun? He wasn't bragging, but all the girls in Shangjing were not as good-looking as him. Qingjing was speechless. He had seen narcissistic people, but he couldn't stand Han Yu being so narcissistic every day. Right, this is for you. Han Yu took out a piece of bamboo from his sleeve. What's this? Qingjing took it and saw that it was his teacher's handwriting, which said, the examination question is out. My teacher left it for you. He said that you would know when you read it. How would I know if you don't know? Han Yu answered honestly. Qingjing's fingers traced the words on it. Suddenly, a thought flashed through his mind, and he suddenly understood. He was speechless. This thing of yours came a little late, Qingjing said regretfully. Han Yu was confused and asked, do you know what the teacher is talking about? If I'm not wrong, he's probably referring to the General Evaluation Officer, Lu Zhongqing. The final exam question was set by the General Evaluation Officer. Lu Shi had not yet arrived in Shangjing, so no one knew what question he would set. The question had already been set, which actually implied that Lu Shi had already arrived. So, Lu Zhongqing has already arrived in Shangjing? It happened about 2 hours ago. Qingjing signaled Han Yu with his eyes, look at the two crying Langjuns over there. They were ignorant and offended County Chief Lu. Now they look sad. They are not hopeless. They know what will happen to them. Han Yu said, I've met County Chief Lu. He's not as violent as the rumors say. He's a gentleman like the bright moon. He has a gentle temperament and treats people generously, not inferior to you, Yumo. What did they do? How could they offend County Chief Lu, who had just arrived in Shangjing? The exam was just around the corner, and they had the courage to offend the General Evaluation Officer. It was true that the General Evaluation Officer had to be fair and impartial. He couldn't be partial to anyone, but it was easy to kill someone. It was no wonder that the two looked like they had lost their parents. Without a strong enough background, they shouldn't have confronted Lu Shi at this time. They amused themselves with the passers-by. They didn't expect that the Langjun of County Chief Lu's family would pass by on a horse in plain clothes. They thought that he was a pushover and almost killed him. County Chief Lu only had one son, how could he not be angry? Han Yu was stunned and it took him a long time to react. Wait, who did you say that they almost killed? Did he hear it wrong? Qing Jing was quite confused. Han Yu's reaction was a little too extreme. He repeated, the Langjun of County Chief Lu. Han Yu was speechless. Wenbin, what's wrong? Qing Jing couldn't help but ask. The Langjun of County Chief Lu's family. He is a devil. He is more difficult to deal with than County Chief Lu. Han Yu took a deep breath and said, if they offended County Chief Lu, they would at most give them a warning for the sake of their reputation. But that Langjun kills without spilling blood. Qing Jing was doubtful and couldn't believe it. How could it be? Judging from his behavior, he doesn't look like a person who cares about every little thing. Han Yu used to think so too. Until he left Hejin County, he heard all kinds of rumors one after another. Not to mention anything else, just the fact that he dared to go against all the laws of the world, implemented the purchase restriction under the pressure of many aristocratic families, and even provoked many aristocratic families in Hejin County. Han Yu didn't dare to look down on the Langjun of the Lu County chief's family. After asking Feng Jin for confirmation, Feng Jin gave him a firm answer that the purchase restriction must have been set by Lu Shi. It was not a big deal to seek death. It was a real ability to live well after seeking death. Let's wait and see. Those two are going to be unlucky. They will at least be hurt. Han Yu curled his lips as if he was watching a good show. His eyes were sparkling. Qing Jing was speechless. He didn't know whether he was wrong about Lu Shi or Han Yu. Oh, I almost forgot something important. Han Yu quickly sat up straight. He suddenly remembered something important. Lu Lanting came to Shangjing with his father to find a master and study in Langyi Academy. According to County Chief Lu's style, he will go to the master as soon as he settles down. If I go there now, I might see something interesting. Qing Jing smiled. Master said a long time ago that he will only accept 4 disciples in his life. Now that the 4 are here, there are no more places. There was still hope for studying, but it was impossible for him to become a disciple. His master looked not only for talent but also for fate. Han Yu said as if he wanted to see the world in chaos, that's why it's worth watching. This gathering is so boring. It's either I flatter you or you flatter me. It's so boring. Instead of wasting time here, it's better to go and see that young Langjun. When are you going to rein in your jumpy temperament? Although that was what he said, Qing Jing was already convinced. He had had enough of this boring gathering. Instead of wasting time here, it was better to go to Jishan Hot Spring to drink, appreciate the flowers through the fog, and talk about poetry and painting. Jishan Hot Spring? Jiang Pengji arrived at the Lu mansion. She thought she would see her friend Feng Jin, who she hadn't seen for a long time, but she was told that he had gone to Jishan Hot Spring to enjoy himself. Chapter 266. I really can't tell that you're actually this kind of Yuanjing. When Lu Shi found out where Master Yuanjing was staying, he found out from the boy's servant that Master Yuanjing had brought a group of students to Jishan to soak in the spring. It was estimated that they would be soaking for a few days. Lu Shi, who had come empty-handed, had a slightly cracked expression on his face. Was he supposed to wait for a few days? In that room, Lu Shi was extremely depressed. Why was he depressed? He could not possibly bring his daughter to the hot spring to look for Master Yuanjing, could he? Although hot springs were also divided into male and female hot springs, they were separated. Not only that, but in recent years, the culture had gradually become more conservative, and the status of women had been declining at a speed visible to the naked eye. The belittling of women in the outside world had also caused their freedom to be restricted, which led to the cold weather. Most of the people who went to the spring were men, and there were almost no women. Even if there were women, most of them would be noble women of noble families. There would be people following them in and out to avoid accidents. Wasn't it ridiculous to ask Lu Shi to bring his daughter to a men's spa just to find Yuanjing? However, if he did not look for Yuanjing, he could only wait until he was done playing with his students and left Ji Shan. If Master Yuanjing was so powerful, why didn't he predict his plan? Why did he choose to soak in the spring at this critical moment? Annoying, Omega. Lu Shi silently hated Yuanjing for a while. He sighed and continued to think of a solution. Before he could come up with a solution, Feng Ren took the initiative to invite Lu Shi to Ji Shan's hot spring to relax. He had even thought of a reason. The assessment is around the corner. The young talents of Dongqing will gather in Shangjing. These days, all kinds of scholarly gatherings and poetry gatherings are happening one after another. Zhongqing is always busy with work, so he should take a break from time to time. Ji Mountain is a popular place for scholarly gatherings and poetry gatherings. Why don't we go together? Although he said that he was fooling around, he could actually take the opportunity to visit Dong Qingjun incognito and see what kind of person he was in the examination hall. Lu Shi pursed his lips and didn't say anything. When did the secretariat become so free? Judging from Feng Ren's familiarity with the hot spring, he was probably a regular customer of Ji Shan's hot spring, the kind that would go there every few days. On the other hand, Lu Shi was only the county chief of Hu County, but he had been busy for a few years. He worked day and night, and he didn't even have a holiday. He took the salary of a county governor and did the workload of an emperor. Feng Ren was one of the top head of the secretariat, a real high-ranking official. How could he be so free? After hesitating for a while, Lu Shi decided to ask for his daughter's opinion. If she said yes, then he would go. If not, then he would wait a few more days. Needless to say, Jiang Pengji's answer was to go. Why not? Jiang Pengji asked Lu Shi. Lu Shi opened his mouth but couldn't utter a word. That's right, why not? But daughter, you are a daughter. Lu Shi's mind was in a mess. He felt that he and his daughter were thinking about different things. Due to geographical reasons, there were many natural hot springs in the northern part of Dongqing. Among them, Mount Ji, which was near Shangjing, had the highest concentration. During the Great Xia dynasty, the royal family had built a hot spring palace in Ji Mountain, and several generations of emperors had expanded it. Those emperors held the hot spring in high esteem. Many books and unofficial histories even believed that the hot spring had the miraculous effect of increasing one's lifespan, prolonging one's life, and curing all kinds of diseases. It was also respectfully called the immortal spring by many common people. Whether it was the royal family or the common people, they loved the hot spring very much. Especially in late autumn, they couldn't wait to move. After the fall of the Great Xia dynasty, the world was divided. Dongqing established the dynasty with Shangyang County as its capital, which was now called Shangjing. Mount Ji, which had many hot springs, was near Shangjing. It only took 1 to 4 hours to get there by horse carriage. The distance was short and it was very convenient. The royal family of Dongqing took advantage of the previous dynasty. They slightly renovated the original hot spring palace and changed it into a new royal palace. Because 2 or 3 generations of emperors of Dongqing were incompetent, their goals in life were to seek pleasure and pleasure. Naturally, they paid great attention to the hot spring palace that brought them joy. They visited it 4 times a year, and each visit lasted at least a month. Each visit was a waste of manpower and money. There were many hot springs in the Ji Mountain range. The largest area was occupied by the royal family and became the Royal Hot Spring Palace. The other areas were occupied by various aristocratic families and wealthy merchants. They were converted into hot spring hotels of different sizes and served different guests. The rich and powerful could enjoy quality service, and the common people could also experience hot spring in ordinary hot spring hotels. Therefore, when the weather was cold, the hot spring hotels were especially popular. Mount G's hot spring was not just a place to soak in hot springs. After many years of development, it had long become a tourist attraction centered around the hot spring. Not only could one soak in hot springs, but there were also wine shops, tea houses, restaurants, and shops that sold all kinds of exquisite small goods. In addition, there were many scholars and beautiful ladies who held elegant poetry gatherings. There were even many brothels and brothels. At night, it was as bright as day. The Fong family's horse carriage drove all the way from the foot of the mountain to the mountainside. Finally, it stopped in front of an extremely luxurious mansion. When they got out of the carriage, there were already many luxurious horse carriages parked neatly around it. Upon closer inspection, there were all kinds of family emblems on the carriages. If it wasn't for Xianda leading the way, I would have thought that this was a mansion of a noble family. I couldn't tell that it was a hot spring hotel. Other than the common people, the other gentry families didn't build hot spring hotels to make money. They built them to provide a place for their children to have fun and enjoy themselves. The hot spring hotel that Lu Shi saw was many times more luxurious and larger than his Lu mansion. Extravagant and luxurious. Other than these 4 words, he couldn't think of a better way to describe it. This is under the name of Prince Changsho. It said that it was built according to his mansion. During the evaluation month, it's open to all young talents for free. That's why it's the place that holds the most gatherings and poetry events. The more the merrier, the more the merrier. I'm just here to join in the fun. Lu Shi was speechless. Jiang Pengji, who was behind him, secretly chuckled. She didn't expect that such a mature guy like Feng Jin would have such an interesting father. Feng Ren's words were very clear. He came because the hot spring hotel was luxurious and exquisite, and it didn't cost him any money. Prince Changsho. Lu Shi frowned. He's so brazenly trying to win me over. He's really ambitious. Lu Shi had spent all his energy on Hu County in the past few years. He didn't pay much attention to the various forces in the court. Even though Gu Min had told him that Prince Changsho would be one of the contenders for the throne in the future, Gu Min's history was not good. She only remembered that the guy had been eliminated very quickly and was a coward who was too soft to listen to. The only famous advisor under him was Qiguan Rang. All this information had led Lu Shi astray. He had the impression that Prince Changsho was the same, cowardly, weak and useless. Feng Ren coughed and said in a low voice, "Let's go to the hot spring first before we talk about this." They picked up their bowls to eat meat and put down their chopsticks to curse. They hadn't enjoyed the free hot spring provided by Prince Changsho, so they didn't talk about it for the time being. If they wanted to talk about it, they had to wait until they enjoyed the hot spring. Lu Shi was speechless. Chapter 267. There were basically no rules for ordinary people to soak in the hot spring, but it was different for the gentry. In order to reflect their status, there were rules everywhere. Jiang Pengji was led to a courtyard by the servant girl of the hot spring hotel. First, she had to burn incense and bathe from head to toe. Her hair had to be carefully washed. More than 50 kinds of spices were ground into powder and placed in exquisite powder boxes of the same size for the guests to use. She rejected the servant girl of the hot spring hotel and entered the bath that was about 3 to 4 square meters to take a bath. She quickly wet her hair and washed it. The clothes that she wore after the bath were folded neatly and placed aside. The material was smooth and airtight, and there was a faint orchid fragrance on it. From the cloth to the clothes, it would only be worn by one guest once. After changing it, it had to be burned. It could not be recycled a second time. Not to mention other things, just this alone was shockingly expensive. Similarly, it was shockingly extravagant. Jiang Pengji got out of the bath and slightly wiped the water droplets on her body. Then, she wrapped the bulge in front of her chest tightly with the belt around her chest. Finally, she picked up the snow-white clothes and put them on. She used the same snow-white belt to tie a knot around her waist. Fortunately, the culture of this era was more conservative. Even if it was a hot spring, few people would be shirtless. Otherwise, Jiang Pengji would be able to see a shining white body. She was not shy, but she could not stand the extremely deformed bodies. It was an eyesore. Although it was just a hot spring hotel, since it was built according to the model of Prince Changshuo's mansion, it was naturally extravagant. Pavilions, corridors, pavilions, buildings, platforms, halls, and halls were all available. There were open waterside pavilions on the hot spring or on higher ground. After bathing, one could have a drink or two there and look into the distance. The hot spring was of different sizes. Each hot spring was separated by exquisite rockery, waterside pavilions, and pine and cypress trees. Although it was open, it also protected privacy. When bathing in the hot spring, one could look up at the sky. It made one's mind open, and it was a different feeling. Dense steam rose from the water surface. The sound of musical instruments entered one's ears. There was endless singing and laughter, as if there were people chatting and laughing. Indistinctly, there were the silhouettes of people drinking with each other. It was ethereal like a fairyland on earth. Lu Shi and Feng Ren had already cleaned up. One of them was taking a nap in the spring, while the other was drinking tea by the shore. They seemed to be discussing something. When Jiang Pengji came over, Lu Shi hurriedly said to her, "I still have something to discuss with the head of the secretariat." Lanting, go to another room. What a joke. That was a daughter, not a son. Jiang Pengji responded with a sound of agreement and allowed the servant girl to lead her to another unoccupied hot spring. Along the way, she saw many men who looked to be in their teens or 20s. Their faces were painted with exquisite makeup, and their lips were painted with rouge. Under the rising mist, their figures appeared graceful due to their delicate steps. Not only that, these people's clothes were always loose, revealing most of their chests. She silently moved her eyes away and clicked on the live stream. Eyes, I can't let her be the only one to suffer. Only a good host can bear hardships together. She gave herself a like, and the viewers in the stream were speechless. Originally, he thought that the live broadcast would be taking a break for a day. He didn't expect that the other party would start without warning, and the live broadcast was so unbearable. Lo Siji Lianmeng, host, are you ready to drive? They didn't mind seeing the host pressing the handsome young man to the ground and ravaging him, but they did mind seeing a group of fat men with big ears, ordinary looks, and bodies full of fat torturing their eyes in front of the camera. In this world that values appearance, can you not be so cruel? Dushu Xiaobing, my eyes are going blind. Host, you are so cruel. Can you imagine? A fat pig in his 20s, whose height and body width were almost the same, walking with his waist twisting and turning like an orchid? It's fine if his chest is exposed, but where are his abdominal muscles and mermaid lines? They only see black chest hair, a bulging belly, and greasy fat. Oh, and a big cleavage. Jube chestnut, I looked at that uncle's chest, and then looked down at mine. I suddenly feel that I don't deserve to be a woman. My roommates always laugh at me for being flat-chested. I used to deny it, but now I can only cry and admit. I am flat-chested. Tangchao chestnut, #perverted. Speaking of which, I haven't seen the host's chest yet. Jiang Pengji raised her eyebrows and walked past the man with the big cleavage without changing her expression. Her chest. How should she put it? When she saved Ching Cheng, the system gave her a reward. Plump and milky breasts. Raise your wrists high and turn your body, and let your breasts cover your clothes. Under Jiang Pengji's persuasion, the system didn't directly send the reward to her. Instead, it sent it to the backstage in the form of a card. Of course, she didn't use it. Lu Shi's body was only 12 years old, and there were still 3 to 4 months before he turned 13. Why would he need breasts when he was so young? Give me some sake. She pushed open the door that only served as a cover and entered. There was a small hot spring that was 5 or 6 square meters in size. In the center of the hot spring stood a graceful stone statue of a fairy flying in the sky. The statue's palms and fluttering clothes were cleverly changed into plates for serving tea and wine. The servant bowed and left after receiving the order. Jiang Pengji first tested the temperature of the hot spring with her fingertips, then she put her feet in and sat by the spring. There were also 2 delicately shaped stone lions by the spring. They carried trays on their heads, and visitors could place food on them while enjoying the hot spring leisurely, enjoying the delicacies, and admiring the beautiful scenery around them. To be honest, Jiang Pengji came from the distant future. As the head of the army, she had never experienced such luxurious service. The people in the ancient times really knew how to enjoy themselves. They used limited resources to make themselves live well. The service in the hot spring restaurant was very good. Not long after, 2 pretty maids came in one after the other with sake and cups. They put down the items in their hands after getting Jiang Pengji's permission. Throughout the whole process, they did not make a single sound. At that time, the door was still open, and Jiang Pengji could see what was happening in the waterside pavilions outside. She pointed outside and asked one of the servants, "Not only do you have soaking soup here, but you also provide other things." The servant had a gentle and appropriate smile on her lips. She followed Jiang Pengji's line of sight, and her pretty face suddenly turned pale. The other servant was afraid that she would say something wrong, so she hurriedly said with a smile, "If you like it, I am naturally willing to serve you, Lang Jun." The servants were all carefully selected. Whether it was their appearance, the way they spoke, or the way they walked, they all looked like they had been measured with a ruler. In a place like the hot spring, although they were dressed very tightly, in front of a group of men who only wore a layer of clothing, it was more likely to cause an adrenal response. Of course, they were all literate people, so they wouldn't force themselves on them, but it was inevitable that they would take advantage of them. Frankly speaking, in the eyes of the men who came to the hot spring to enjoy themselves, these servants were not much nobler than the ladies in the brothels. Jiang Pengji curled her lips and revealed an indescribably frivolous smile. The servant didn't understand. She thought that Jiang Pengji wanted them to serve her, but then she saw Jiang Pengji pull her feet out of the water. She lifted a jar of wine with one hand, opened the seal, raised her head, and directly poured the entire jar of wine into her mouth. Occasionally, some of the wine dripped from her chin and slid down her neck. The 2 maids were a little stunned. They had never seen a Langjun drink so boldly and unrestrainedly. Jiang Pengji looked down at them with a clear look. "I am drunk." It was time to settle the score. Chapter 268. Langjun, Langjun. The maids hurried forward, and Jiang Pengji drank a jar of wine in front of them. Although her eyes were still clear, her steps were a little shaky, and her figure seemed to be swaying as she walked. She looked like a typical drunkard. They didn't know if Jiang Pengji was really drunk, but they knew that if they didn't keep an eye on her, she would fall into the hot spring. If something happened to her, they would lose their lives. They couldn't let anything happen to her. Jiang Pengji avoided the obstruction of the 2 maids and left the hot spring. She stared straight at a waterside pavilion in front of her. As the saying goes, one can wear out iron shoes in fruitless search, but by chance one finds it without any effort. She didn't take the initiative to find the 2 men, but they couldn't wait to die. The 2 men, who were targeted by Jiang Pengji, didn't realize that they were in danger. Instead, they laughed and chatted with their companions. One of their hands restlessly touched the maid's body. Looking at the maid's embarrassed expression, but she didn't dare to resist, the fright they had during the day was greatly alleviated. "If you like it, you can summon this maidservant tonight to relieve your longing." TSK TSK. This looks decent. It's indeed the hot spring hotel under Prince Changsho's name. The maidservants here are all beautiful. The young man who was called brother was moved, but he couldn't show too much enthusiasm. It would make him look like a pervert. This. How can I do that? A gentleman doesn't take what others love. How dare I take away what you like? A snow-white robe was loose on his body. The belt was loose, revealing most of his chest. Because he had been pampered for years, his skin was fair and rosy. It was more delicate than a girl's. However, wine and women had taken away his body. His eyebrows were drooping, and he looked listless. Hey, you and I are still fussing about this? Women are like clothes, and brothers are like hands and feet. This is just an insignificant woman. If you like her, you can enjoy her. The young man waved his hand carelessly. Birds of a feather flocked together. The two fops' auras matched each other. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been able to hang out together. Since you said so, then, before he could respond, the smell of alcohol assaulted his nostrils. Although it was not pungent, it diluted the lingering body fragrance of the maid. The young man raised his head in annoyance, only to see a drunken teenager holding a wine jar blocking his way. Remember who I am? Jiang Pengji narrowed her eyes and looked down at the two young men sitting in the waterside pavilion with a faint smile. The tourists who were enjoying the cool found that the atmosphere was not right. They could not help but pay attention to this place. They either watched the show with cold eyes or were secretly curious. With the evaluation around the corner, no one wanted to be dragged into this mess. Strange, how would I know who you are? A young man smiled contemptuously. Of course, he did not recognize Jiang Pengji. He thought she was just an ordinary tourist. You don't know? Jiang Pengji squinted her eyes as if she was tipsy. Suddenly, she moved closer to one of them. You drunkard, stay away from me. This is not an ordinary hot spring hotel, not just any lowly person can come here. The young man leaned back and politely declined the smell of alcohol on Jiang Pengji's body. His face was full of disgust. Jiang Pengji suddenly opened her mouth, revealing a mouthful of snow-white teeth. Her smile was evil and wanton. Just as the two young men were about to lose their patience and wanted to push Jiang Pengji away, a snow-white foot suddenly appeared. Ah, there was a loud splash, and the hot spring next to the waterside pavilion splashed a huge amount of water. Everyone watched helplessly as one of the young men was kicked off the waterside pavilion by the drunk teenager. His whole body flipped over and fell into the hot spring. More importantly, the kick was aimed at his face. Because of the sudden movement, the loose clothes on the young man's body immediately became unable to fall off. His belt loosened and his lapel opened, revealing his white body. The young man was still flopping in the water. He was caught off guard and choked. His entire person seemed to be in an extremely sorry state. What are you looking at? You go down too. Without waiting for the others to react, Jiang Pengji turned around and kicked the other young man into the hot spring. There was another splash, and a huge splash happened to fall on the previous young man. The two of them rolled in the hot spring. Ha ha ha, don't I look like a skinned frog? Jiang Pengji laughed wantonly. She crossed the waterside pavilion's fence and stood on the rock garden next to the waterside pavilion. What are you looking at? Bring me wine. Jiang Pengji turned her head and scolded the stunned servant girl. Bring me wine. The servant girl seemed to have woken up from a dream. Her mind was not clear yet, but her feet had already obediently retreated. She had completely forgotten that the most correct thing to do at this time should be to go forward to persuade and eliminate the conflict between the two parties as much as possible. She should not help the tyrant by giving Jiang Pengji wine. Who allowed you to stick your head out? Jiang Pengji smiled and stepped on one of their heads. She kicked him back into the hot spring with an undisguised evil and carefree expression on her face. Who are you? How dare you touch me? Oh, before he could finish his sentence, Jiang Pengji stepped him back into the hot spring. Caught off guard, he choked on his nose and mouth. Who am I? Jiang Pengji took the wine jar that the servant girl handed over. She removed the seal and raised her head to drink a mouthful of wine. She quickly stepped on another person's head back into the water. The people who were watching the show could not sit still, but no one dared to stop Jiang Pengji. Among the two youths, which one was smaller? They were actually kicked into the hot spring by a teenager. Even if the stranger had the advantage of being caught off guard, it could be seen that he was not weak in martial arts. His leg skills were excellent. Looking at the teenager's appearance, it was obvious that he was half drunk and unconscious. If they went forward to stop the fight and were implicated by the other party without distinguishing between friend and foe, they would be humiliated and kicked into the hot spring as well. Wouldn't they want to die of shame? The heavens are watching what people do. Did your brains not come out of your mother's womb? You don't even know who you have offended, and you still have the face to threaten me. Who gave you the courage? Jiang Pengji scolded them sternly. Her eyes were sharp, and there was some hostility in them. With such a performance, no one dared to stop the fight. They could only call for the person in charge of the hot spring. Help! Help! The two of them wanted to climb out of the hot spring, but Jiang Pengji's legs were faster than their reaction speed. Their brains were about to be kicked silly. In the end, they had no choice but to shamefully ask for help. Naturally, they could not avoid choking on a few mouthfuls of hot soup. As soon as they opened their mouths to ask for help, Jiang Pengji laughed even more arrogantly. She looked at them as if they were two mice in boiling water. Young Lang Jun, a man can be killed, but not humiliated. No matter how much hatred you have for these two, you should not be humiliated like this. Even if Jiang Pengji was drunk, such arrogant and humiliating actions still touched the sensitive nerves of many people. Jiang Pengji grinned and glared at the guy who begged for mercy. Chapter 269. Jiang Pengji's blunt retort made the man's face turn red and then green. She clicked her tongue, turned her head, and sneered at the two embarrassed young men who had choked on the hot soup. Today, you two almost killed me and the people of Shangjing City. Why didn't you think about what would happen to you now? The two drowned rats were full of hatred, but when they heard Jiang Pengji's words, they suddenly shivered and sobered up. They were terrified, and they didn't even dare to struggle. Many onlookers witnessed what happened. They were disgusted by Jiang Pengji's arrogant behavior, but after hearing her words and looking at the two men's guilty expressions, many smart people changed their expressions. They pretended nothing had happened and went on with what they were supposed to do. Obviously, the drunk teenager had suffered a loss at the hands of the two men and almost lost his life. Now, he was there to get back at them. It was better for outsiders not to get involved in this kind of dispute. Tisk, bullying the weak and fearing the strong. Jiang Pengji raised her head and drank a mouthful of wine. According to the way she drank, the jar of wine was going to be empty again. Weren't you two very arrogant in the day? Why are you so cowardly now? Where's your backbone, your pride, your courage to use my life to take pleasure? Have they all been fed to the dogs? Idiots. Jiang Pengji was not drunk. She was very sober. She was there to cause trouble, so she naturally wanted to vent her anger. It was Shangjing. She couldn't kill the two men, but she could stomp them into the ground in front of everyone. A villain intoxicated by success. At that moment, the surroundings were quiet. A crisp sound came from one side, and the atmosphere became more and more tense. Jiang Pengji maintained her sneer and looked at the person who said that. She asked in a dangerous tone. Are you saying that I am a villain intoxicated by success? The one who spoke was a young man in his early 20s. His skin was dyed a bit red because of the hot spring. His face was like jade and his eyes were like dots of lacquer. His dark cloud-like hair was wet and hung on both sides. Through the dense mist, his figure seemed a bit frail. Aren't you a villain intoxicated by success? The man was not afraid of Jiang Pengji's sneer. Instead, he snorted and said, according to what you said just now, these two almost killed you by mistake. Since that's the case, you should be a gentleman and take revenge if you have a grudge against them. On the other hand, what you've done is to humiliate the two of them in public while you're drunk. What you've done is really inappropriate. To put it bluntly, wasn't this the behavior of a playboy? The bullet screen in the streaming room stopped. Many viewers were afraid that Jiang Pengji would kill someone in the next second and stain the hot spring with blood. In fact, Jiang Pengji did not. Instead, she laughed cheerfully. She did not even tease the two fops. If I'm a vile person, won't this Langjun be overflowing with the heart of a saint? Jiang Pengji threw the wine jar in her hand into the hot spring. The water splashed and splashed on the faces of the two playboys. I'm standing here today and humiliating them because I'm still alive. If I was unfortunately shot by that arrow and died on the spot, would you feel sorry for me? Jiang Pengji snorted coldly. I know you can't do it. After all, you're not related to me. The dead will always be dead. They're not as important as the living. If you still want them to live, shut up, or I'll kill them myself. The young man's face changed. He said, you're really twisting words and forcing logic. You're taking advantage of your ancestors' influence to commit such crimes. You're wrong. They're taking advantage of their ancestors' influence to amuse themselves with the lives of the commoners. If the commoners die, they'll be scolded at most. No one in the King of Hell can uphold justice for the dead. Jiang Pengji suddenly raised her voice and said, if you want to reprimand someone, you should first scold these two beasts who are worse than pigs and dogs, instead of speaking righteously to me. I'm just taking revenge if I have a grudge, that's all. How can commoners be compared to gentry? The young man retorted. Jiang Pengji was so angry that she almost laughed. She scolded him back. Did a donkey kick you in the head? The young man suddenly opened his eyes wide. He didn't expect Jiang Pengji to scold him so crudely. What was the difference between that and pointing at someone's nose and scolding them? This young Langjun is right. Zuda, you shouldn't confuse the truth just because commoners are cheap and gentry are precious. Although the young Langjun was reckless and impulsive, he was also a man of character. There was a reason for his actions, and he should be considerate. However, you've really crossed the line by scolding him so harshly. Zuda is thin-skinned. He can't stand such abuse. When the atmosphere was tense, a mellow laughter interrupted them. It was a little teasing. Jiang Pengji frowned and looked toward the direction of the sound. She saw a middle-aged man with gray hair and beard, but he didn't look old. He was hale and hearty, and his steps were light. When the man appeared, the young man's expression changed. He bowed to him and said respectfully, Master. Are you the young Langjun of Lu County Chief's family? The middle-aged man came to Jiang Pengji. His eyes seemed to have seen through everything. Jiang Pengji frowned. He said, You're indeed a dragon among men. You look extraordinary. Who are you? Jiang Pengji didn't even bother to pretend to be drunk because of the man. She looked at him with burning eyes. The young man, who was called Zuda, was dissatisfied with her arrogant behavior. His master was respected by everyone. When had he ever been stared at so rudely? Jiang Pengji's previous behavior left a bad impression on him. The young man hated her even more. The middle-aged man smiled kindly and raised his hand to stop the student. I thought you should know. I'm not talented, so people give me a nickname, Yuanjing. Yuanjing? Jiang Pengji's mouth twitched. She didn't expect to see the legendary master Yuanjing under such circumstances. He looked like an ordinary middle-aged man who had just finished soaking in the hot spring. He didn't seem to be as mysterious as the rumors said. Master Yuanjing laughed. He was quite optimistic. His eyes slightly curved like a crescent moon. In Shangjing, a piece of tile can kill 3 high officials. Young Lang Jun, you're a newborn calf that's not afraid of tigers. You can do anything. Jiang Pengji clicked her tongue and said with a smile, no, you're wrong. I still have my concerns. Otherwise, these 2 people would have been killed on the spot. They wouldn't have just drunk a few mouthfuls of hot spring water. After that, she thought of something. Actually, according to what your student said, the gentry are more noble than the common people. But there are different levels among the gentry. Naturally, I'm more noble than these 2 people. They offended me, so no matter how I humiliate them, it shouldn't be wrong. The young man named Zuda was speechless. Chapter 270. That's a bunch of nonsense. The young man was enraged by Jiang Pengji's words. It was hard for him to maintain his elegant demeanor. Jiang Pengji snorted. She looked at Master Yuanjing and then at the young man named Zuda. She mocked, you said that I'm talking nonsense, but why don't you take a look at what's in your head? The sage said that the people are more important than the king. If the king is like this, how can the gentry be more important than the people? You said that I rely on my ancestors, but you can argue with me here because you have a good ancestor, right? Jiang Pengji did not like the young man named Zuda. She realized that not only did he have the heart of a saint, but he was also retarded. The young man was speechless. Jiang Pengji spoke again, but this time, she was not talking to the young man. She was asking Master Yuanjing. I thought that Master Yuanjing was famous, so he should be very careful when he accepted disciples. How could he be so old and blind that he accepted such an extreme and stubborn blockhead as his student? She did not hide her disdain for the young man when she said that. This time, the young man was so angry that he couldn't even speak a word. His face was flushed red. He did not care how Jiang Pengji attacked him, but he could not let her implicate his respected teacher. Master Yuanjing was not angry. Instead, he looked at Jiang Pengji meaningfully. Humans are not perfect. Even saints are like this, let alone ordinary people. As a teacher, you need to know that teaching is not discriminatory. Then you can teach, and solve doubts. Although Zuda is wrong, he has his merits. How can you just look at one side and deny everything about him? If what you said is true, Langi Academy should be empty. I'm not a perfect teacher, and I'm not qualified to be a teacher. It was because of his shortcomings that he needed to learn. It would take more than 1 or 2 days to correct, not to mention a well-formed temperament. Master Yuanjing said calmly. There was even a smile on his face that made Jiang Pengji feel uncomfortable. If one had to describe his smile, it would be cunning. Master Yuanjing was respected by the people and the students. It was not only because he fought for the 3 cities from the royal court of the north borderline when he was young, nor was it because he was knowledgeable. More importantly, it was because he treated his students equally. Whether it was the son of a noble or the descendant of a peddler, in his eyes, a student was just a student. He would not look up to a student because he was outstanding or had a noble background, nor would he look down on a student because he was stubborn or had a lowly background. As long as their nature wasn't bad, their roots weren't rotten, and there was still room for improvement, then they were worthy of his careful guidance. Jiang Pengji said, "You're quite protective." Mr. Yuanjing said calmly, "Zuda's nature isn't bad. He's just a little paranoid, but he can still change." Jiang Pengji squinted her eyes and said, "Oh." She suddenly raised her hand and pointed at the 2 people who were still in the hot spring and did not dare to come out. In your opinion, what do you think about these 2 people? When she asked this question, many people who were watching the show pricked up their ears, and the person in question even had his heart in his throat. Being targeted by Lu Shi meant that they were not fated to be officials, but if Mr. Yuanjing praised them, there was still a chance. Mr. Yuanjing suddenly smiled. He raised his hand and stroked his gray beard. His eyes were a little bright. It was said that one's eyes could reflect one's true age. Mr. Yuanjing took good care of himself, but he still looked like he was in his 30s or 40s. His eyes were clear and bright, with a deep wisdom. It was impossible to guess his real age just by looking at his eyes. Mr. Yuanjing had seen people who held grudges and aggressive people, but it was rare to see someone like Jiang Pengji. He said, looking at his behavior, he has a dignified appearance and is made of gold and jade. Looking at his inside, he has a belly full of rubbish and is rotten inside. Are you satisfied with this answer, Lang Jun? Lu Shi alone would not let the two young men have an easy time, but she dragged him into this mess. She was trying to push them to the edge of death. Really, she was evil, he thought. How could Mr. Yuanjing not see that he was being used by Jiang Pengji? But he did not like to be calculative with the younger generation, so he did not expose her. Mr. Yuanjing's evaluation was like a bolt from the blue to the two young men's ears. Although they were in the warm hot spring, they felt like they had fallen into an ice cellar. A terrifying chill spread from the soles of their feet to the top of their heads. Lu Shi had cut off their path to fame. Mr. Yuanjing's evaluation was enough to make them lose their footing in Dongqing. Jiang Pengji smiled with satisfaction. Her eyes were slightly curved like the bright crescent moon, which was similar to Mr. Yuanjing's. I drank too much just now. Please forgive me if I offended you. Mr. Yuanjing shook his head helplessly. She was taking advantage of the old man's age, but he was not blind. He could see clearly whether Jiang Pengji was really drunk or pretending to be drunk. It's okay. It's just that drinking hurts the liver. It's better for young people to drink less. Zuda, let's go. I'm sorry, master. I was rude today, so you were put in a difficult position by a kid. After leaving the waterside pavilion, the young man named Zuda hung his head low like a rooster who had lost a fight. He was unhappy. Mr. Yuanjing folded his hands in his wide sleeves. His footsteps were leisurely as if he was taking a stroll in the park. Zuda, look at that young Lang Jun. What do you think of him? The young man turned his face away. He was still angry. He has a sharp tongue and a bunch of crooked reasoning. Mr. Yuanjing did not comment. He raised his eyebrows and asked, what else? The young man was speechless. He could not say anything else for a long time. Mr. Yuanjing sighed and said, you were blinded by anger and resentment, which affected your judgment. This is a taboo for a strategist. You can't judge a person by his appearance. You have to observe his words and actions carefully. You have to find out the reason behind it. Otherwise, even if that young Lang Jun is a dragon among men, you won't be able to see him. Isn't it a pity? He spoke calmly. His tone was like he was talking about family matters and not lecturing a student. The young man was not convinced. Did you say that the young man is a dragon among men? Such a high evaluation. Mr. Yuanjing stopped and turned his head to smile at the young man. Not even 1 in a million. The young man was speechless. It's just that this person is too stubborn and easy to break. His temper is so flamboyant. It's easy for him to get into trouble. Mr. Yuanjing pondered and sighed. He's like a piece of unpolished jade. Although he has natural beauty, he hasn't been carefully carved. People don't know his inner qualities, so they treat him like a stubborn stone. More importantly, she had the mandate of an emperor, but she was a girl. Mr. Yuanjing secretly raised his eyebrows when he thought about that. The old man was not blind. He could tell if Jiang Pengji was a boy or a girl. Since Mr. Yuanjing was so sure about Jiang Pengji, the young man could calm down no matter how unconvinced he was. He looked at her objectively. He muttered and felt slightly wronged. I'm blind. I only see that this person is arrogant and bullying the weak. Mr. Yuanjing smiled like a naughty child and teased him. So, I'm your teacher, and you're my student. The young man was speechless. Chapter 271. Since Master Yuanjing was bringing a few students with him, the hot spring that he had requested was very big. There was even a smaller companion spring inside. There was a pavilion, a terrace, and a waterside pavilion. It was enough for the master and his students to have fun. This was also the most luxurious private room in the hot spring hotel. If he wasn't Master Yuanjing, who was famous in Dongqing, he wouldn't have been able to get such a good room. Zuda accompanied Master Yuanjing back. When he was about to open the door for the master, he saw Master Yuanjing wave his hand with a playful expression. "Listen, is there anything strange?" The young man, Zuda, was confused. They didn't go to the wrong room. Why was the master keeping them in suspense? "Master, what's wrong?" Master Yuanjing smiled and said, "Usually, they follow the rules and etiquette, but they like to play around in private. When I'm not here, how can it be so peaceful if they don't play around? Therefore, there should be a distinguished guest. Zuda, what do you think of my appearance?" The young man choked and then said seriously, "Master, you are handsome and spirited. You don't lose to the young people." Master Yuanjing nodded in agreement and said, "I think so too." The young man was speechless. He opened the door with the air of a knowledgeable scholar. His clear eyes scanned the inner room and he understood. He saw the person he expected and said, "I haven't seen you for many years. How have you been, Chief Lu?" Because of Gu Min, the Lu residents and Master Yuanjing had some connections. The two families had contact with each other. Even though Gu Min had passed away many years ago, the second wife didn't forget to send gifts to Master Yuanjing during festivals. The two families had a good relationship. The distinguished guest that Master Yuanjing mentioned was no doubt Lu Shi. As for Feng Ren, he was just there to join in the fun. The teacher secretly glanced at a few of his students. They were well behaved because Lu Shi and Feng Ren were there. Each of them was acting like a gentleman. One of them was reciting, two of them were competing, or three of them were discussing poetry collections in secret, whispering to each other. They were quite good at bluffing. Lu Shi had been waiting for a while. When he saw Master Yuanjing finally appear, he couldn't help but feel relieved. To be honest, this hot spring room was poisonous. Any student who mentioned it seemed to be famous in history or unofficial history. He felt a little pressured. He went forward to greet Master Yuanjing, and the two of them sat down. Before Lu Shi could speak, Master Yuanjing said, "I know why you're here, County Chief Lu." Lu Shi opened his mouth and swallowed the polite words he wanted to say to warm up the situation. He asked, "Since that's the case, what do you think?" The other students seemed to be very serious, but in fact, all of them pricked up their ears to listen to the purpose of County Chief Lu's visit. "I have said before that I will accept 4 people as my disciples according to fate. A while ago, I had already accepted a filial disciple. 4 people have reached the age limit, so I will not accept any more disciples. Your son is a dragon among men. If you don't mind Langi Academy, you can come and study here. You are most welcome." Master Yuanjing shook his head, but he did not look regretful. "Moreover, even without Zixiao, your Lang Jun and I are not fated to be master and disciple." Lu Shi felt a little annoyed. He hadn't said anything yet, but the old man in front of him had already said everything he could. However, he didn't force it. His initial plan was to go to Langi Academy and leave everything else to fate. Now, it could be said that his wish had been fulfilled. That's good. Then I'll temporarily entrust this mischievous son of mine to Mr. I hope Mr. will take good care of him. Master Yuanjing said half-truthfully, "Your son is full of anger. If I don't take care of him, my Langi Academy will be overturned." Lu Shi's facial expression changed slightly when he heard that. If others heard Master Yuanjing's words, they would definitely think that Master Yuanjing despised Lu Shi's son for being naughty or difficult to discipline. But Lu Shi understood what Master Yuanjing was implying. Master Yuanjing and Master Liaochen seemed to be able to see that Lanting's fate was extraordinary. Master Liaochen once said that there were less than 5 people in the 5 kingdoms who could see the emperor's aura around Jiangpengji. However, his daughter seemed to be unlucky. Not only did she meet Master Liaochen, but she also met Master Yuanjing. I am not a talkative person. You can rest assured, County Chief Lu. Master Yuanjing saw through Jiang Pengji's physiognomy, but he did not expose her. Instead, he quietly covered up for her. It was obvious that he did not have the same opinion as others. According to the scholar's point of view, a woman with the emperor's fate was a demoness who brought disaster to the country. At their level, they had already broken away from the restrictions that ordinary people had. Otherwise, how could they be called masters? Many times, even if they saw something, they would keep quiet. Lu Shi forced a smile. If Lanting is really so naughty and overturns your academy, the Lus will help you rebuild the academy even if we have to spend all our fortune. Master Yuanjing stroked his beard and said, County Chief Lu, I am looking forward to it. Lu Shi was speechless. Looking forward to it? At that moment, Master Yuanjing added, the roof of the east wing was blown open by the strong wind last time. The students are not good at repairing it, but it still leaks every rainy day. If you really help the academy rebuild it, the children will not have to climb up the roof. Lu Shi was speechless. I can't believe you are this kind of Master Yuanjing. In Lu Shi's mind, Master Yuanjing should be as bright as the moon. He should be a noble person who was hard to get in touch with. Now that he met him, how should he put it, it felt like his idol had been shattered. It seemed that Master Yuanjing was too down to earth. Feng Ren, who was beside Lu Shi, was also stunned as if he had been struck by lightning. No one would have thought that Master Yuanjing, who was said to be otherworldly, was like an old child in reality. If that's the case, I will go and call my son here so that you can take a look at him. Master Yuanjing smiled and said, there is no hurry. I have just seen the little Langjun outside. He is indeed a bright and healthy child. There is no need to trouble you, County Chief Lu. I will let my students run errands for you. Why don't you play a game with an old man like me? For some reason, when Lu Shi heard Master Yuanjing talk about his daughter like that, he suddenly felt uneasy. It was understandable that he had a bright and clean face, but where did he see that he was healthy and healthy? Not only was Lu Shi confused, but the young man from Zuda University who followed Master Yuanjing was also confused. How could that rude teenager be the Langjun of County Chief Lu? Then I will have to trouble you. Lu Shi looked calm, but he felt a little uneasy. He felt that his daughter was stirring up trouble again. Zuda, go and make the arrangements. I will have a game with County Chief Lu. Everyone knew that Master Yuanjing was proficient in music, chess, calligraphy, and painting. But his students knew that Master Yuanjing loved to play chess. He would often play chess and entertain himself for the whole night. Master Yuanjing held a black chess piece with his back facing the door. It was as if he had eyes on the back of his head. He said to the young man who had just crossed the door, Zixiao, go and call for the number 3 Tianzi room in the Fanghe courtyard. Tell her that the little Langjuan's father wants her to come here. The young man seemed to have just finished bathing. His black hair was wet and his shoulders were wet. Hearing his master's order, he didn't doubt it. He lowered his eyes and agreed. That little friend is also Master Yuanjing's student? Lu Shi looked up and almost threw the chess piece. He even forgot to ask a question. Chapter 272. Master Yuanjing smiled and asked Lu Shi, you mean Zixiao? I took him in a while ago, so it can be said that I have made up for my regret. By the time he finished speaking, the young man had already turned around and left, leaving behind only a slightly thin and tall silhouette. Lu Shi's eyes widened as if he had thought of something. After a long while, he said in a low voice, so, he is Mr.'s 4th disciple. His appearance is indeed extraordinary. Although he said that, he was secretly suspicious. When did Wei Zixiao become Yuanjing's disciple? He was bewildered, and his eyes darkened. Wei Ci was from Langia and was also studying in Langia. However, due to the changes in his family, he left Dongqing with his entire family. Master Yuanjing squinted his eyes. His cold gaze seemed to have seen through everything. Seeing Lu Shi's reaction, he said meaningfully, "Originally, I couldn't have accepted this disciple. Although we were destined to be master and disciple, we were not master and disciple." Lu Shi's hand that was holding the chess piece paused. His face was filled with curiosity and suspicion. "If that's the case, why did you accept him as your disciple? You don't know this, but Zixiao has a knot in his heart. This also causes him to be intelligent, but he also likes to get into a dead end. If he's not careful, he'll step onto the wrong path. In the past, I wanted to take him as my disciple twice, but he refused both times. Now that he is willing to be enlightened, I am naturally overjoyed." To Yuan Jing, there was nothing more gratifying than seeing a promising seedling untie the knot in his heart and grow strong and healthy. Lu Shi was completely dumbfounded, as if he had just heard a heavenly book. There had always been others chasing after Yuan Jing to be his disciple. How could there be someone who could make Yuan Jing chase after him? Wei Ci. Min only said that he was a good strategist. Simply put, they were the prettiest among the smart and the smartest among the beauties. This was a man who used his face to brush official history, and his schemes only appeared in unofficial history books. So, Master Yuanjing, are you sure you're not joking? To be loved by Mr. so much, he must not be weak in any aspect. Lu Shi tried his best to maintain his composure so that he would not reveal any flaws. Of course. Zixiao, it's IKEA. Lu Shi and Feng Ren, who was watching the game, were speechless. Wait, IKEA? IKEA? Are you sure there's nothing wrong with this description? Dong dong dong, Jiang Pengji was lazily soaking in the hot spring. A neatly folded towel rested on her forehead. Her long black hair was fixed at the top of her head with a hairpin, revealing her slender and fair neck. Her skin was covered with water droplets. Because of the fog, it was as if she had a filter on her entire body. Although she was still wearing clothes, the audience in the live broadcast room expressed that they could not take it anymore. Sugar-fried chestnuts, #perverted. I really want to climb in and have a bath with the streamer. Streamer Jingjing Shanghua, there are always unruly people who want to compete with me for the streamer. Hearing the knock on the door, Jiang Pengji opened her tipsy eyes. There was a faint blush on her face from the steam, as if she had applied a layer of top-notch powder on it. Did the maidservant bring the wine? She raised her eyebrows and said lazily. Come in. Just leave the wine by the side of the pool. Outside the house, Wei Ci, who had obtained permission, opened the door slightly. Hot and humid air blew into his face, and his vision was filled with white mist. The audience in the streaming room was the first to notice the abnormality. At that moment, Jiang Pengji was still lazily half-lidded. One chestnut, host, stop sleeping. There's a strange man coming in. Be careful. Lo Siji Lianmeng, it's a man, not a maidservant. Host, don't sleep over. Be careful not to be taken advantage of. Wei Feng Tang Tang, host, stop sleeping. Get up quickly. Someone reminded Jiang Pengji. Naturally, there were also people who noticed the strange man's appearance. But in a flash, the bullet screen full of infatuated fans covered all the reminders. It was an unprecedented grand occasion. Looking at the changes in the bullet screen, Jiang Pengji frowned slightly. She did not need to turn her head to guess the person's magnificent appearance. The audience in the streaming room did not have any other good points, but they had a normal sense of beauty. Not every beautiful face could make them lick the screen. You seem to have entered the wrong door, Jiang Pengji said without turning her head. She supported herself with both arms by the side of the pool and relaxed her whole body. The strange man outside did not come in. Instead, he lowered his head and spoke in a low voice. His voice was between a teenager and an adult. I am Wei Ci. Your father has summoned you to Tianzi room number 1 in the Rose Garden. Hearing that, Jiang Pengji suddenly turned her head to look at the man. She asked, "Are you talking about my father?" Wei Si's body stiffened imperceptibly. He suddenly lowered his head and immediately returned to normal. It was as if the abnormality had never occurred. He said with certainty, "Yes, your father is playing chess with my master. He specially ordered me to come over and pass on the message." Jiang Pengji secretly rubbed the area between her eyebrows. Although it was very comfortable to soak in the hot spring, one could not soak in it for too long. "Why are you so reserved, Lang Jun?" "Wait a moment. I will go with you after I tidy up." "It's okay. Help yourself." The next second, the door closed again. There was a vague shadow at the door. It was obvious that the person had not left. Seeing that, Jiang Pengji frowned but did not say anything. Climbing out of the hot spring, she temporarily closed the streaming room. After a simple wipe, she changed into a dry robe. After doing all that, she reopened the streaming room and pushed open the paper door at the same time. She said to Wei Si, who was kneeling at the door, "Please lead the way, Lang Jun." At that moment, without the cover of the fog, Wei Si's appearance was clearly visible to her. Seeing him in person, she could understand why the look-alike person in the streaming room was so excited. His long, black hair was warm and damp. It draped over his shoulders, leaving wet marks. The ends of his hair were dripping with water droplets. His face was like jade and his skin was like fine porcelain. Because of the heat, his cheeks were a little flushed, giving people a slightly intoxicated feeling. His hair was like a knife, his eyebrows were like ink, and his pure black eyes were cold and calm. When he looked at Jiang Pengji, he did not reveal the slightest emotion. It was as if he had emptied his mind. Not to mention anything else, just this alone made Jiang Pengji feel that it was interesting. It seemed that she had just met this young man for the first time. Why did he have such a high level of vigilance against her? Her eyes turned and a plan came to her mind. Jiang Pengji knelt on one knee and moved slightly closer to the young man. Her pair of eyes that seemed calm could not help but ripple. "If it wasn't for the fact that you have an Adam's apple and don't have ear piercings, would have thought that you were a young lady. You actually came to the hot spring alone." Wei Si's face was cold. He leaned back slightly and distanced himself from Jiang Pengji. He frowned slightly in displeasure. "Young Lang Jun, this joke is a little too much. I don't like people talking about my appearance for fun." Jiang Pengji stood up and crossed her arms in front of her chest. "I was obviously praising you for your good looks." Wei Si pursed his lips tightly and stood up to lead the way. He said coldly, "I am a man. It is really rude to compare me with a woman." Jiang Pengji was speechless. "Oh, he has quite a temper." "Lanting?" A familiar yet slightly doubtful voice interjected. Chapter 273. TSK, I was wondering who it was. "So it's the famous Fenger Lang Jun. It's really easy to find traces of you." Jiang Pengji walked to the side of the corridor, which was separated from Feng Jin by a pond. The two of them conversed through the air. Feng Jin felt wronged. He did not know that Jiang Pengji would be in Shangjing at that time. If he had known earlier, he definitely wouldn't have come out to soak in the spring with his classmates. Just now, when he was leaning against the railing and looking into the distance, he suddenly saw a familiar figure. He thought that his eyes were playing tricks on him, but he didn't expect that it was really his friend. "I haven't seen you in a few months." Lanting's glib tongue has only increased. "You're able to pin a groundless crime on me without any hesitation." Feng Jin smiled. At that moment, a classmate beside him called out to him. Feng Jin apologetically said to Jiang Pengji, "Lanting, please don't blame me. We'll catch up later." After Jiang Pengji greeted him, she realized that Wei Si was looking coldly at Feng Jin's back as he turned around. "I just met an acquaintance. Wei Lang Jun, please lead the way." Wei Si withdrew his gaze and did not say a word. One after the other, they soon arrived at the Rose Courtyard Sky Room 1. Lanting, come here. This is Master Yuanjing. In the future, when you learn from teacher, you must remember not to be naughty and mischievous. Lu Shi's chess skills were not bad, but compared to Master Yuanjing, he was still lacking. So, he lost without feeling depressed or embarrassed. By the time Wei Ci brought him over, the chessboard had already lost its momentum. Lu Shi decided to divert his attention. Master Yuanjing said to Jiang Pengji, "Little friend, we meet again." "Hello, sir." She greeted him obediently and said to Lu Shi, "Don't worry, father. I know." At this moment, Wei Ci, who was talking to his classmate in a low voice, glanced at her out of the corner of his eye, then quietly shifted his gaze. Master Yuanjing was addicted to chess. How could it be enough to defeat Lu Shi? "I'll call you Lanting." He shifted his gaze to Jiang Pengji and asked, "Will you play a game with me?" "As you wish." Jiang Pengji did not know how to play chess, but Lu Shi had learned it before. Although his chess skills were not very good, his basic skills were very solid. She, who had inherited Lu Shi's memories, naturally knew how to play chess. The opening was a little miserable. Feng Ren and Lu Shi, the two observers, couldn't stand it anymore. They wanted to roll up their sleeves and play the game themselves. Lu Shi was even more suspicious. His daughter's chess skills were not that bad. How did Wei Yuan teach him? Unexpectedly, Master Yuanjing acted like a beginner. He placed his chess pieces randomly, and no one could figure out what he was planning. As a player, Jiang Pengji understood that the other party was intentionally guiding her. Jiang Pengji couldn't help but be more serious about the game. She went through Lu Shi's memories in detail in her mind. After familiarizing herself with the game, she used her own method to calculate. The speed at which she placed the chess pieces became slower and slower. In the end, she had to think for half a cup of tea before she placed a chess piece. At that moment, Master Yuanjing suddenly smiled. The game of chess had finally begun. Master Yuanjing looked at the chessboard and smiled. "I've won this round." Jiang Pengji pursed her lips so tightly that they almost formed a straight line. There was still some heat in her eyes. "One more round." "No more, no more." Master Yuanjing shook his head and looked a little tired. "I'm already old. How can I compete with young people in terms of energy?" "Lanting, if you still want to play chess, Zixiao is the best among all of us. You can play 2 rounds with him." Jiang Pengji frowned and looked at Wei Ci. Wei Ci narrowed his eyes and said indifferently, "I'm not feeling well. It's not convenient for me to play with you." Jiang Pengji was speechless. She didn't do anything to him, did she? Why is he so angry? Not only was Jiang Pengji surprised, but Wei Ci's classmates who were close to him were also confused. What's wrong with Zixiao today? Why do I feel like he's a different person? You think so too? Did that Lu Xiao Langjun unintentionally make fun of his appearance? Although in this day and age, the beauty standard of men was based on gentleness, the more feminine, the better. Their bodies were delicate and soft, and they would be blown away by the wind. There were some people who hated that kind of atmosphere. Wei Ci was one of them. He hated being treated as a woman, and he hated it even more when others made a fuss about his appearance. If Lu Shi violated this taboo and was treated coldly by Wei Ci, it seemed to make sense. Jiang Pengji's hearing was amazing. Naturally, she didn't miss the discussion. She was also confused. At most, he just said that he was good-looking. Did he have to be so angry? However, she wasn't a credit, nor was she gold or silver. She couldn't expect everyone to like her. If Wei Ci didn't like her, so be it. It wasn't like she would lose a piece of flesh. Jiang Pengji soon forgot about this detail. She sat quietly at the side and watched the others play. Lu Shi, Feng Ren, and the other elders were also sensible. They knew that their presence would make the others feel uncomfortable, so they simply found an excuse to leave. However, before Lu Shi left, he winked at his daughter. "Don't give yourself away, my daughter. Do you know how to play the drinking game?" Jiang Pengji was young. The others were either in their 20s or about the same age. She, a teenager, sat quietly in the corner and watched the others play and talk. No matter how one looked at it, the scene was a little sad and pitiful. Therefore, someone took the initiative to talk to her. She was silent for a while, then said, "I know how to drink." "Huh, you're still young. You only took a few sips of wine. How can you say that you know how to drink?" The other party smiled and patted her shoulder as if they were close friends. "We'll be classmates from now on. When you arrive at the academy, if anyone makes things difficult for you, just tell them my name." She listened and nodded shyly. Her big, watery eyes were wide open. If a screenshot was taken, it could probably be named Jiang Pengji's Cleverness JPG. The drinking game was originally an activity to liven things up during banquets. Jiang Pengji also knew some of the rules. All the youths present were top students. Even if a few of them weren't that great, they were the type that could make up for their inadequacies with hard work. When they played the drinking game, the content was naturally as difficult as possible. Poems, songs, and essays were all over the place. There were also obscure geographical knowledge, unofficial history, and biographies. In short, although they couldn't understand it, they always felt that it was awesome. After an hour, Jiang Pengji's brain was stuffed with words. She rested her chin on her hand and looked indifferent. She felt someone was approaching her. She turned her head and saw Wei Ci, who had a bad temper, push a tray toward her. There were all kinds of dried fruits and snacks on the tray. He looked down and avoided Jiang Pengji's sight. Jiang Pengji was surprised and asked, "Did I offend you in any way?" Wei Ci didn't answer her question. "I heard Wenbin mention you a few days ago." Jiang Pengji was stunned. She suddenly remembered the words she used to fool Han Yu. She used to fool Han Yu by saying that she had seen Qing Jing and Wei Ci in her dream. She even described Wei Ci as beautiful. Was it because of that? She coughed awkwardly and said with a lack of confidence, "It was just a misunderstanding. I used it to fool him." Sure enough, a lie needed several lies to cover up the loophole. Wei Ci said calmly, "It's okay. Since you didn't mean it, I won't hold it against you." Jiang Pengji secretly squinted her eyes. A glimmer of light flashed in her eyes. It would have been better if Wei Ci didn't explain. The more he explained, the more she felt that he was trying to hide something. Chapter 274. Wei Ci looked at Jiang Pengji's side profile, and his heart was filled with complicated feelings. She was like a savage, bloodthirsty, and ferocious beast that lived on human flesh, staring at his fragile neck. Her snow-white teeth had some minced meat on them, and saliva was dripping from them. He could smell the stench coming from the tip of his nose. The shadow of death shrouded him. He thought he was going to die, but in the next second, she turned into a palm-sized white cat and meowed at him in a cute and crisp manner. It was probably an illusion. "But why do I always feel that you are deliberately guarding against me? Do I eat people like a Rakshasa?" Jiang Pengji held her cheeks in puzzlement. Her lips curled into a faint smile, and she asked him innocently. Of course, it was only an illusion. Wei Ci gathered his thoughts. His nerves were tense, as if he was facing a formidable enemy, but he calmly narrated on the surface. "Little Lang Jun, you misunderstood me. When did I deliberately guard against you? Ci and Lang Jun are not familiar with each other, so I should keep my distance." Jiang Pengji squinted her eyes and suddenly moved closer to him. Wei Ci's reaction was also very interesting. He was like a frightened rabbit. She sneered in her heart when she saw him suddenly lean back. Instead of retreating, she moved closer to Wei Ci and whispered in his ear. They were so close, but she could clearly feel the trembling of his body. That kind of fear and panic, which could not be controlled by reason, made her more curious. Wei Zixiao. Jiang Pengji deliberately pretended to be innocent and restored her previous cold and serious tone. She said, I don't know why you are so guarded against me, and even afraid of me like a snake, but I hope you understand that the more you act so clearly, the more it arouses my curiosity and desire to investigate. So, are you avoiding me, or are you playing hard to get? It was unknown which sentence provoked Wei Xi, but his reaction was about to explode. Dong, the movement in the corner attracted the attention of others. They saw a young person single-handedly holding Wei Xi's hands. His expression was cold and his eyes were fierce. On the other hand, the restrained Wei Xi was lying on the ground in a slightly embarrassed state. Perhaps because of the struggle or something else, his cheeks were dyed red. With a plop, a student sitting by the hot spring saw the scene and was so shocked that he dropped the fruit plate in his hand. What happened? Sorry, I'm just messing around. You guys continue. Jiang Pengji smiled as if there was no one around. She changed her posture from a half-kneeling position to a kneeling position. She raised her hand and released the hand that was restraining Wei Xi's wrist. Those with better eyesight could clearly see the faint finger marks left on Wei Xi's wrist. They were playing a little too hard. Wei Xi's chest heaved up and down rapidly. His facial expression was a few degrees below zero. He looked at Jiang Pengji with bloodshot eyes. You tried to push me away just now. I instinctively thought you were going to attack me, so, spreading out her hands, Jiang Pengji had a look that said, this is not my fault. Wei Xi pursed his lips tightly and did not say a word for a while. Wei Xi propped himself up from the ground and ignored the words of concern from the people around him. He strode out of the hot spring room. As long as one was not blind, anyone could see the huge words on Wei Xi's back, I'm angry. The culprit who provoked Wei Xi, Jiang Pengji, was dumbfounded. She did not want to take the blame. She did not want to offend Wei Xi. After all, he was one of Master Yuanjing's 4 disciples. He had his own connections in Langyi Academy. He was a bully that could not be offended. She wanted to go to school, not to fight. Why would she provoke Wei Xi for no reason? However, the current situation was that she did not want to offend Wei Xi. Wei Xi came up to her and made her offend him. In the end, he even put the blame on her. What af** king injustice? Oh, you're the little princess. You have the final say. The audience in the streaming room was rather disappointed. They thought the streamer was going to live stream driving. They did not expect that she would not even drive a toy car. Nide Yida, #perverted. Just now, the streamer confined him to the ground with one hand. I thought she was going to drive. Streamer Jingjing Shanghua, I used to think that the domineering CEO was very cliché and cliché. But now I understand why such a cliché is popular. It's entirely because at the moment when you're pinned against the wall, you feel the thrill of being conquered. Streamer Xijing Shanghua, streamer, shouldn't that be called Didong? If she stood against the wall, she would probably only hit her chest. Looking at the discussion of the audience in the streaming room, Jiang Pengji could not help but have an illusion. She bullied the little princess. But the problem was that she was really not that crazy. Not only did the audience in the streaming room think so, but even the audience who were watching the live broadcast thought so. Although Zixiao is born beautiful, he is a real man. The person who had tried to get close to Jiang Pengji came over. It was unknown whether he was gloating or something else. Although we have many sworn brothers now, you are still a little young at your age. After he finished speaking, he raised his eyebrows at her and gave her a look that all men understood. Jiang Pengji's face darkened after she heard that. Wei Xi left the hot spring room. The cold wind outside blew and cleared his feverish mind. Just as Jiang Pengji said, if he behaved as usual and did not reveal any abnormalities, the other party would probably not even look at him. That was exactly what he wanted. But he was not mentally prepared. He showed an abnormality and attracted the other party's attention. The current situation was the complete opposite of his original plan. He stood in the corridor in a daze. The bright white moon in the sky was reflected on the pond. The scenery was pleasant and it made his state of mind slightly calm. Now that he had calmed down, he did not intend to go back. He was afraid that he would give himself away again. Only God knew that what Jiang Pengji said just now scared him to the point that all the hair on his body stood on end. He was almost scared out of his wits. Forget it, forget it. I will treat her as usual. Wei Ci calmed down for a while and gave himself enough psychological hints. Only when he felt that he could face Jiang Pengji normally did he turn around and return to the hot spring room. Just as he opened the door, he saw that there was no one inside. There were some liquor tags scattered on the low table. He looked at the empty hot spring room and was stunned. Where is she? She went to cause trouble. Jiang Pengji felt that there were a lot of things to do today. She did not soak in the hot spring much, but she encountered a lot of annoying things. Especially after she was wronged by the little princess, Wei Ci, something came to her door immediately after. This time, it was her friend, Feng Jin, who called for help from outside. When she arrived, the matter was already a little out of hand. Feng Jin, who was originally elegant and graceful, looked angry. His face was covered with bruises. The bruises on his white jade-like face were very eye-catching. Feng Jin was the second legitimate son of the head of the secretariat, Feng Ren, who had the guts to hit him and even hit his face. Jiang Pengji saw that not only was Feng Jin's face injured, but his arm was also cut by a knife. Half of his arm was almost dyed red. She was furious. Chapter 275. Feng Jin was grimacing in pain, but when he heard Jiang Pengji's arrogant declaration, his hands stopped hurting, but his stomach hurt. If they were in Hejin County, it would be fine for her to be so arrogant. At least Lu she could handle it. But now, they were in Shangjing, where the emperor was. She did not have the advantage of being a local snake, but she could still be so arrogant. Thinking of his humility just now, in exchange for such humiliation and a knife to his arm, he suddenly felt that it was better to be arrogant. Lanting, be careful. These people are not friendly. Feng Jin covered his wound with his left hand. Blood kept flowing out from between his fingers. His face was pale because of the pain and blood loss. Even his voice was very weak. Messengers from the royal family of the northern borderline, Jiang Pengji looked at the few strong men who were confronting the people in the courtyard. Each of them had small braids of black hair and a floral scarf on their heads. Their thick eyebrows slanted to the temples, and their faces were deep and well-defined. She could tell at a glance that they were foreigners. They were naked from the waist up. There were strange and complicated tattoos on their shoulders and chests. One could vaguely see that they were ferocious beasts. Their muscles bulged like stones, and one of their arms was thicker than Feng Jin's thigh. Their skin was oiled and could even reflect light. Oh, messengers from the royal family of the northern borderline? Jiang Pengji sneered coldly and took 2 steps forward. The crowd automatically made way for her. Feng Jin, you've lived like a dog, haven't you? You're the son of the head of the secretariat, and you're being bullied like this? They're just watchdogs. They're not the descendants of the royal family of the northern borderline, and you're beaten up like this. You're a disgrace to your father. Feng Jin's expression changed. He was not angry at Jiang Pengji's harsh words, but it was the truth. The son of the head of the secretariat was beaten up in the hot spring house under Prince Changshuo's name, and his important right arm was also injured. Because of this injury, it was very likely that he would not be able to participate in the assessment in a few days. Who are you calling watchdogs? Jiang Pengji stood in front of Feng Jin and looked at the person who spoke. Some of the other students were watching, and some wanted to go forward to help, but they did not bring any weapons. Just by comparing their size, how could they be a match for the strong men who were holding knives? Feng Jin was the unluckiest. Not only did he hurt his arm, but he was also slapped in the face. The rest of them had messy clothes and occasional scratches. TSK, he's scolding the dog that stole his sister-in-law. It was as if Jiang Pengji had eaten gunpowder. She was in a bad mood. Now that someone was asking for a beating in front of her, she naturally rebuked him without holding back. Don't people in the North Borderline have different levels? Apart from the royal family, everyone else was second-class trash. Calling you watchdogs is a compliment to show the friendship between our two countries. Feng Jin had never seen such a shrewish Jiang Pengji. He was so shocked that he forgot about the pain. Those rough men were also choked by Jiang Pengji's scolding. The leader looked fierce, but he was not good with words. They felt that those scholars were weak and only knew how to mutter. Their legs added together were not even as thick as one of their arms. It was a sensitive period. Even if they humiliated these people, the Dongqing royal family would not do anything to them. Who did you say had an affair with sister-in-law? A trace of panic flashed across the leader's face. He took a step forward with his knife and instantly closed the distance between him and Jiang Pengji. He threatened her fiercely. Jiang Pengji laughed and grinned, showing her white teeth. You also stole your father's concubine. Feng Jin knew that Jiang Pengji would not speak without a reason. What she said was probably true. Otherwise, the strong man would not have reacted so fiercely. Suddenly, he could not help but think of the night in the bandits' village, when Jiang Pengji exposed his background. Huayu, which dog hurt you? Jiang Pengji did not care about the strong men in front of her at all. If they were not happy, she would fight. She would not lose in an argument, let alone in a fight. Lanting, Dongqing is a land of etiquette. Feng Jin secretly smiled bitterly. Oh yes, the one who hit me was the one with the green headscarf. He felt that Jiang Pengji's words were very cool, but he also had to pay attention to the influence between the two countries. However, his friend was willing to stand up for him, so he could not refuse her kindness. Speak the human language to people because people can understand the human language. Speak the dog language to dogs because dogs can't understand the human language. Look, if you speak the human language to them, they can't understand. But if I speak to them like that, can't they understand? Jiang Pengji snorted. When dealing with foreign friends, you should change accordingly and actively eliminate the language barrier. That is the correct way of diplomacy. Everyone knew that Jiang Pengji was bullshitting, but some people felt that they had been brainwashed. This kind of fallacious reasoning seemed to be quite interesting. The strong men from the northern borderline were there to pick a fight. Originally, they were quite happy to bully the weak scholars, but when they met Jiang Pengji, who was so eloquent, they suddenly became angry. If they could not win in an argument, then they would fight. Anyway, it would be fine as long as no one died. Dongqing had been emphasizing culture and restraining martial arts for many years. The men at the border of the northern borderline were considered to be unyielding men, but after they entered Dongqing, all the men they saw were sissies with flowers in their hair and powder in their hair. Occasionally, there were a few normal men, but they did not use their limbs. They could pat their chests and say that the white chickens in the courtyard were not enough for them to chop, let alone the short man in front of them. As it turned out, they seemed to have met a fake sissy, but a real Hercules. Bang! Jiang Pengji's body was thin and small, so she had the advantage of dexterity. Her strength and appearance had nothing to do with each other. They thought they could take her down with a raise of their hands, but they did not expect her to be more slippery than a loach. She snatched the blade from one of the men's hands with her bare hands and pinched the man's wrist with 2 fingers. Not only did she force the man to let go of the blade, but at the same time, she turned around and got close to the man's chest. She pulled the man's body forward, and with her other elbow, she struck the man's Adam's apple. In a flash, she caught the handle of the blade that the man had let go of. At the same time, she twisted her body and kneed the man. Those with sensitive ears could even hear the sound of a sack bursting and liquid splattering. Everyone was speechless. Wait, that position. Feng Jin was so scared that he took a step back. His legs were faintly trembling. Jiang Pengji used the strong man's body as a shield to block the knife that was aimed at her back. She turned her wrist and the blade turned in another direction. It was as if she had eyes on the back of her head. The blade moved agilely in front of the ambusher's eyes. Suddenly, blood splattered, and it hurt people's eyes. That was not all. After she dropped the shield, her fingers became claws and strangled the man's throat. She pulled him down and threw him to the ground. Not only did his face hit the ground, but the force of Jiang Pengji's fall made his face a bloody mess. It was clearly a dozen strong men ganging up on one person, but looking at the situation on the battlefield, it looked like Jiang Pengji ganging up on a group of people. Feng Jin knew that Jiang Pengji could fight, but he did not know that she could fight to this extent. Those strong men were well-trained warriors of the northern borderline. They were few in number, but on the battlefield, they were like a human head harvester. Tell me, which dog's paw hurt Huayu? You're tuning into the Romantic Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.